Yeah. Okay. Good day, everyone. I welcome you all to Global Self-Education Platform, GSEP's Power Series. And I am Kafayat Kehinde Lamidi, and I reside here in the UK. GSEP Power aims to empower future global leaders. Why this is the main focus of today's seminar. The theme is global leadership, practical solutions to wicked problems. As suggested by the team, today, me with my colleague, we are looking at addressing three overlapping concepts. The first one is global leadership. The second one is empowerment. And thirdly, we have wicked problem. In order to set the context, I'm going to ask us, who are global leaders? Secondly, what is your understanding of empowerment? And thirdly, what are the examples of wicked problems that you are familiar with? Everyone is free to use the chat room to engage in interactive sessions, so you can just type in your answer. While you are doing that, I'm going to provide a clarity of context, drawing on example using Professor Susan Madsen and Professor Bruno Cignacco, Tracy and myself, Kafayat Kehinde Lamidi. And these are examples of global leaders. And these people have been selected using the GSEP framework as individuals who are recognized and selected based on the diverseness of their contributions towards humanity beyond their immediate environment, or let me say beyond our immediate environment. Yeah, we are making our own little impact in our own little way. So unlike the recognition of the top 10 richest Nollywood actors, by financial value or assets. For example, Jackie Chan, net worth of $350 million. In this case, we give attribution to global impact and diverseness in contribution to the society. So the second part, which is the wicked problem now. I describe this as the most challenging and complex issues around us. And due to the interconnected and the nature of this problem, I'll give some example. Climate change is one, poverty is another one, health-related issue is another wicked problem. For example, COVID-19, the most recent one that we are all going through globally right now. And mostly relevant to the goals of Global Self-Education Platform, we have education, we have economic growth, and we have sustainable society. To be able to steer now our youth and young adults, inclusive male and female, towards becoming global leaders, we need to give them the autonomy, and this is in relation to granting them absolute control of ownership with the ability for them to claim responsibility of their action as leaders, as global leaders, as well as providing the support to help them build greater heights of resilience, capacity, self-compassion, and self-confidence. In doing so, we are empowering them. So now the question before me is, how can we steer future global leaders? Let me go to the next slide. Sorry, that I've been adamant for some time. So there we go. How can we steer future global leaders? From my research, I have put together these 11 points. The first one, we need to encourage our boys and our girls to get involved in Scouts activities. That's one way to empower them. Secondly, when we are planning events like this one I am doing with my colleagues right now, we can make them co-hosts. Thirdly, we can motivate them to take part in school governorship as well as prefectship. You can see on the right-hand side of my slides, I have the head prefect badge. That belongs to my 15-year-old daughter. And the reason why I've specifically used that as an example is that sometimes, our boys or our girls, they do not feel that they have the confidence to take up a leadership position or to pursue leadership position. But it is our own responsibility as global leader, as part of a global village. In that definition of global village, I mean myself, yourself, everyone out there, teachers like myself, like Professor Susan Madsen, like Dr. Bruno, Roque, Cignacco, like Tracy, like every other individual out there. Parents as well, friends, family, community members, all inclusive. Extend the list, please. So, to create the empowerment facility that can help boys and girls to discover their leadership identities, build self-confidence and self-compassion, thereby unlocking their own leadership potential. Also, team leading, for example, allow them to manage a project, youth-led or student-led initiative as well. You can organize or ask them to organize, events. Let them be the one who is going to share that event. These are called student-led initiatives. Let us start to give them more power to take control and ownership of some activities. Also, they can facilitate workshops. They can become social or religious youth leaders. Also, anchor in events, other conferences or training. They can be the moderator of the event, seminar, of training session. Another one is societal or club leadership. We have business club. We have a lot of different clubs within the school. They can become the leaders of this club. Also, we have kids or teens or young presenter. For example, we are doing sessions like this. Unfortunately, we don't have kids presenter. But in the future, for forthcoming events for Global Celebration Platform, we're going to start bringing on board some young presenters as well. So these are my own few ways from my research about how we can steer future global leaders. So my analysis suggests that there is an interesting interplay between 5 E's that I've put on the screen for you today. With experimenting, we need to give them the push, using phrases like, give it a go, have a go at it, give it a try. Even though my daughter initially, she did not feel like she can go for the prefectship position, I said to her, give it a try, you will enjoy it. It will help you to build your leadership, ability. And she did, and now she will become the head girl of her school for this year. Another one is that on this slide, we have some images of my teenage, which I'm going at the background, as you can have noticed. What that expression is telling us is that sometimes we need to place them in a walk it, talk it scenario or scene where they can engage in discussion or debate, where they are being observed. And that observation is that later we will be able to give them constructive feedback about the debate. So with that, we give them the opportunity on an individual basis to reflect on the lessons that they have derived or what they have learned, what went well, and vice versa. And from there, they will learn from there. And you can see that is where the experience concepts come into the second E. So that way, they have experienced it, and such engagement grant them the willpower to feel empowered, which eventually will earn them their leadership identity. That's why we have the other E as N on this slide here. So there is, I'll leave us with a quote in a minute, and let me just go to that so that you don't. Okay, that's it. I hope we can all see that quote. If it can be experienced, it can be earned. Perhaps it takes a global village to raise a child. Together, we can grant boys and girls the leadership identity and the willpower to feel empowered as global leaders. And you can see today, with the support of Professor Susan Madsen, Dr. Bruno, Roque, Cignacco, Tracy, and myself, that is what we are doing by example. Having set the context for the background of today's lecture, I will now call on our eminent scholars in the room who have significantly demonstrated great leadership, great global leadership specifically, attributes to share their weight of expertise, their knowledge, their life experience with us about how to empower future global leaders. So, as we empower these youths, they too can start to think about how to solve some of these wicked problems around us. With due respect, kindly allow me to call on my humble professor of leadership in the room, Professor Susan Madsen from Utah State University, and she will help us, to address the question how we can or how can we empower girls and women as global leaders. I will stop sharing my screen so you can start to share yours, Professor Susan. Yeah. You can share your slide.
All right, it's good to be here. Can you hear me okay, everybody? Yeah. All right, great to be here. Appreciate that introduction. And I didn't know as much about what the goals of the organization are, but I'm really excited about the focus on young people, actually. It's important to work with everyone on becoming leaders, and especially in my case, I work with women and leadership. And so I'm always thinking about not just women who are in their careers or running for office now, but those generations of girls coming up the line. I have a TEDx talk called Raising Girls to Be Leaders. And actually I use the term, it takes a village, right? It takes a village to actually raise girls. And raising, I really define not just as parenting, but being educators and neighbors and just people that even have moments to encourage and really help girls and young women find their voices. So I think as I talk more about global leaders and the work that I've done and some applications, I think it's so important to think about the importance of not just getting high women leaders to be heads of state or heads of corporations, but also thinking about that pipeline of how do we, even starting at toddlers and young people, because those messages that get to, because of socialization, because of social norms, that get to girls when they're even starting at like a year or 2 or 3 years old. For example, we are socialized to focus on looks for young girls more than boys. So we start talking about, oh, how cute, you are beautiful. And with boys, oftentimes we don't do that. We talk about you're strong, these kinds of things. But what we know through the years is as girls get older into young women and women, that focus on appearance, it continues to be really strong. So there's things, which is not good, by the way, which is not good. Even when men introduce their spouses, sometimes they say, here's my beautiful wife. So that look is front and center oftentimes, which we know actually takes away sometimes from that confidence, that what's in your mind and what's in your heart and your passion. So there's interesting things. I just want to make a couple comments about what you said. I'll dive into more of the presentation I have. I was asked to talk about women as global leaders, and I put for the subtitle here, practical solutions to wicked problems. And actually, I really, the UK has been using that term wicked problems for quite a long time. And I've done a lot of work over in the UK. In fact, right before the pandemic, I mean, like 2 days when things hit, I was supposed to be in Scotland and England in March, and then it got shut down. It's a good thing I didn't fly over. I think it would have been hard to be away from my family for months here in the States. But I love the term wicked problems. They're so complex. I have a slide about them in just a second. But I have written a number of books. They're all really focused on me understanding these first 2 right here. I actually did interviews of 10 of the top university presidents that were women. This one, I interviewed 10 of the women governors in the United States. And my focus was really understanding, how did they, throughout their lives, how did they develop that confidence, find their voice, really get that courage to use their voice and move forward and really become strong leaders, influence and impact people around. So I've always been interested in how do we raise girls to become leaders. My slide about wicked problems, I love that term. This is, in fact, last week I just read a piece on evidence-based policy making, and they talked about how different evidence-based policymaking is with wicked problems. And so this is one, and I put this picture down at the bottom of changes coming in 2020. Oh my gosh, did we have a lot of changes? And most of the changes that have come in 2020 are wicked problems, right? They're not easy. There's not, in fact, that opening, the solutions, sometimes there's really not perfect solutions, especially if they're wicked problems, right? And one of the issues that I love the wicked problems term is that gender and women's issues are truly wicked problems. They really are, because they're so deep and we can't like outline exactly how we resolve things. We can give tips, we can try different things, but it's different for all cultures, for all like families, even for all organizations, for all governments. So this is one definition that comes from one of the articles I just read as a scholar and an academic. Systemic in nature, complexly interrelated, and materialized at the interface between public and private, and profit and nonprofit. As a result, they cannot be handled with the old way that we've been doing things, with the old mental, mindsets, with the old organizational structures. Basically, there's different ways, and the old stuff is just not working when you come to wicked problems. So in fact, my favorite study that's fairly new that I do talk about with complex and wicked problems is one actually out of the UK. So it was released just earlier this year with one of my associations. And in terms of gender, this is how it went down. So it was a study conducted for the military in the UK. And what these researchers found, what they did for this study, it was an experimental study. And so what they did was create a lot of different teams. And with many of the teams, they were 5 or 6 people, but they had only men. And for the other teams, they had only all men, but just one woman on a team, just one woman. And so what they found in a couple of cases, they found that the teams actually did not listen to the women. So they took those, so the teams didn't get the benefit. But what they did was give them a wicked, complex problem and ask them to solve it. And other than the 2 teams that did not listen to the women, the other teams did. In every case, a team with even just one woman outperformed and came up with better solutions than all the teams with just men. So there's actually quite a few studies coming up that say the same thing. Generally speaking, you want to get to that 30% tipping point of having women, but I thought this study was interesting, how making sure to have men and women's voices together creates and diversity as well in other ways, and race and ethnicity and different things. But my work is mainly on gender. Really does create more innovation, more creativity, and so forth. So that's I just wanted to put that out there as I started. And this slide really goes through some of the more recent things, right? So some of these are truly global leaders. So when you look, in my book, I have a book on women as global leaders that's from a few years ago. And we really define, I'll show you a few of the chapter headings in just a minute. But really, those global leaders are women that influence, or men, but women as global leaders influence countries and beyond countries' walls, the interactions beyond those. And so, of course, heads of state are major global leaders as women. And you've probably heard the press on what I have on this slide. Are women heads of state actually excelling during the coronavirus? And early on, they were talking about that. But this one, I believe, this one is still it's from just last week or earlier this week. The world needs more women leaders during COVID and beyond. And so it's interesting. I don't know if you can say that's, that all women heads of state are necessarily doing better right now in terms of their countries in the pandemic, but it's an interesting thing to think about. What this most recent article from this past week did say, though, a recent study that looked at the performance of 194 countries in their fight against COVID-19 found that women-led countries were generally more successful in fighting the pandemic than those led by men. Now, keep listening. However, it's worth noting that there was already a balanced representation of both sexes in the country's key roles of power and influence, suggesting that leadership environments with gender parity lead to healthier, stronger, and more consensual decisions. So what that's saying is, it may not just be because the woman is the head of the country, but it may be because women typically are heads of country, make sure that their teams all the way down through their agencies and governments have more gender parity. And the research is clear that actually when you have both men and women working together, you have better decisions. So it's not necessarily, oftentimes we look at this issue and we look at either or, but it can be and. And sometimes we look at, especially men when they're talking about women as global leaders, men, I've confront men a lot that think it's a zero-sum game. And sometimes women think so too. Like if we raise and help women or people of color or whatever the topic is, then that's taking away from us. So that zero-sum game is not great. But what we know is, even for white men, let's say, that when you lift and really support women, it doesn't mean that it's taking from you. We can lift each other and still lift ourselves, right? It's not a zero-sum game. So I thought that was interesting, a little bit of background there. So what I want to do, I alluded to it just a second ago. I have three sections that I want to, and this first one I want to go through fairly quickly because many of you listening have probably heard some of this, but I think it's important to just brush over it a little bit because I still have so many people in my own state, in my nation, but also in different places where I speak around the world and on Zoom these days, not in person because I don't fly places anymore, but I will. We're going to have hope for 2021, right? But I still need to remind people that there is a strong business case and the research continues to support this, that when men and women work together more in parity, there really are better results and for organizations of different kinds. Now, I'm going to have a slide for each of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. This first one, I don't want to spend much time on. Most of the research on this one actually comes out of for-profit businesses. But not every study has found this, but 95% of the studies have found that when women are on those corporate boards or in top positions in leadership, the company actually does better in terms of financial performance. There's some research now being conducted even in legislative bodies within states or nations as well, and to see if those financial decisions are different, and there's some evidence to support that. So the second one, you see some of these research results coming out of for-profit, nonprofit, some government, some political bodies, that when you have men and women working together, not just a bunch of women, but men and women working together, that you have decreased turnover intentions, higher satisfaction. This one right here is always makes me smile a little bit because the research for years I've taught business ethics continues to say that women are more ethical, generally, not every woman, than men. But some of the research says that if women do embezzle money, at least they take less money than if men do it. Not a great thing to brag about, but I think that's funny. So more considerate team members as well. But like I said, I don't want to take too much time on this, but it's important for all of us to remember, I mean, why? Because I do have women say, why does it matter if I lean in or step forward? And sometimes men say, you just need good people. It really doesn't matter if it's women or men. And I always say it does matter. It really matters. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. We do know, actually, I know a lot of research on these topics through the years with my decades of work. We do know that boys, and this comes in most countries around the world, are socialized more often towards win-loss. And girls are socialized more often into win-win solutions. And think about this. These days, do we need more win-win solutions? I would say absolutely. So oftentimes, from our socialization, men and women look at things different. We do ask different questions. We do ask different questions. And in fact, there's some literature in the United States to support that those states who have more women in their legislation, in their legislative bodies, actually designate more money towards things that women often care about and are passionate about a little more than men. Things like education, healthcare, social programs like giving more services to the homeless and people in poverty and victims of sexual assault and those kinds of things. So things do change when women are at the table. And there's a lot of evidence. I spoke in India a couple years ago on women at the peacekeeping tables and how absolutely that changes things when there are women in those conversations about peacekeeping between and within nations. So just you can glance through this. There really is evidence on this nonverbal that women do pay attention. I know some men that are really great at nonverbal cues as well. And then you can see some of the others. The fourth one, generally you see this play out in government as well as top government positions as well as corporate. When there's women at the tables in those decision-making roles, the company gives more to the community, is involved in corporate social responsibility and philanthropic things as well. And then finally, this one goes with that story on wicked problems. Many studies, we're talking in the hundreds now on just the things that are listed on this slide, that when men and women work together, not just women, not just men, and there's that many government structures right now and businesses continue to be mostly men in those top roles. But when both are together, the research is quite clear now that there's increased innovation, improved creativity, better decision-making, problem solving, collective intelligence. And do we need higher collective intelligence today? Yes, we do. That is very, very, very clear. So there's no excuse in my book any longer to have groups of decision makers that are all men. That's just not acceptable to me, because there are so many qualified, prepared, just like there are women who are sometimes not in that close, old boys club or network, that are very prepared. And we're seeing this in the United States as some of some of the decision making and women moving into prominent roles, very prepared, very competent, ready to be at that table. So we always need women to lean in, but also we need to change structures and systems and practices of companies and governments and at all levels to be able to get the benefits that come when men and women work together in top leadership roles, those roles that are really make an influence. And there's the research is quite clear that there's benefits for all. So that's the first. I just wanted to take a few minutes and make sure that everyone listening remembers, if you've heard that before, because it really is at the base of, we do have the argument that it's the right thing to do to include everyone, right? But beyond that, which I believe is really important, that we need to lift girls and boys and young women and young men and women and have equal representation. But beyond that, it really makes a difference for the people that are served when women are at those tables. So the second part I've got three elements today, but the second part, I want to give you just a little bit on specifically on women in global leadership. So I really appreciate this. Nancy Adler is one of the top, is the top in the world on talking about global leadership and women's leadership specifically. And this quote comes from a chapter in a book, my book on women as global leaders. Increasing the number of women in senior leadership positions is certainly a necessary condition for equity, but it is not a sufficient condition for shaping history. The fundamental challenge is not simply to select more women as senior leaders, although that's important. Rather, it is to provide a form of leadership in the world that will foster global society's survival and prosperity. I think that's a powerful quote from Nancy, who read her stuff if you're interested in this topic. And so this is the book I was talking about that was released about 5 years ago now. And Nancy, you can see that Faith, my dear friend, and I co-edited this book. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Barbara Kellerman, Professor Kellerman's at Harvard, she's very she's written so much on leadership. She did the foreword and is a friend, and appreciate her. But I thought it would just be interesting for you, as we think about women as global leaders, for you to just see the title of some of the, like, what does that mean, and how do we talk about women as global leaders? So I'm just going to list and quickly just read some of the titles of the chapters so you can get a feel. We don't have time today to even get very far in this deep discussion. So I'm not even trying to get very far. I'm just picking a few things I thought would be interesting for you. And I will say this morning, because it's morning here in the United States and in my state of Utah. So you can see Joyce Osland is one of the top publishers in the world on global leadership and what global leadership means. So understanding global leadership is really key, and that's different than international leadership, global leadership and international. And then as you can see, looking at the history, this chapter actually goes through numbers. I was going to do that initially, like telling you where we're at, and then I thought, don't want to go there this morning. That's too many numbers. And then I have a whole section of this book on women's global leader approaches, like different theoretical perspectives, multiple intelligences of effective women global leaders, like emotional, social, cultural competencies, the combination. Another chapter on cultural intelligence, a chapter on becoming more themselves. How can global organizations promote women's authentic leadership? Now, authentic leadership is tricky when you get into women's leadership sometimes, specifically. I mean, you look at women who are running for a political office, and I'm in the States, so I've been, watching that for this year especially. And it's really challenging sometimes to have that authenticity, especially in the global area, and try to be seen as a leader. So leaders are still seen as what? Men. 70 to 75% of that comes up in the research in the United States, as well as the UK and Western Europe, continues to say when people are asked to draw a picture of a leader, 70 to 75% draw a man, and if they can tell a color, a white man, and if they can tell height, a tall white man. And so we still struggle with those kinds of things. And then another approach, I'll skip and go through this fairly quickly. In the book, we also talk about, so I'm just giving you kind of areas that you can dive deeper down into each one. Advancing women's executive development, so effective practices of actually developing women as global leaders. Programs at institutions and universities on developing global leadership in people. So this chapter, this last number 10, is a chapter specifically on Central and South America. And then the last part of the book, which I think is just so critical, is to think about individual stories. Stories are powerful, right? And so we have chapters on, but beyond my book too, just people really want to see examples and stories and backgrounds of women who are global leaders. Then if we do, will be more girls and women that actually connect and think, well, maybe women can be leaders. Maybe they can be global leaders. So you can see a mix about of some different people that were highlighted in our book as global leaders. And then one of the things that I wanted to, I didn't know the audience exactly for this morning. I thought it would be maybe a mix of different folks. But for those of you really interested in a global look at women's leadership and global leadership, but also in how women are doing in terms of equality in different ways, sometimes people think, let me just tell you a thing. So sometimes people think that they're not related. So some of the topics of how gender are going at the foundational level of countries and societies, they're saying, what does that have to do with women in those top higher positions of global leadership? Well, I will say it has everything to do with that. Because if a woman is, and I get a little teary-eyed sometimes on this, if a woman is afraid of how to feed her children, is in poverty, or has been sexually assaulted, or has been feeling subordinated, in different roles, she will not be able to find her confidence, to strengthen her voice, to feel that confidence to step forward and use her voice, to run for office, even at a community or a kind of city or municipality level. And every woman that is a global leader started someplace, right? She started someplace. So if we do not work on public policies and efforts and organizations and societies that help the women who are struggling with even some of the basics, we will not be able to really build in that pipeline to continue to really move more women into each of those steps. Let's say in the organization, a lot of women don't move from frontline up to that next step on the ladder. So big gap right there. And if you don't get that, you don't build them up. So does that make sense? I'm seeing a couple of you. So you're nodding, you're following me, right? So for me, everything's in a bucket. You can't just work with women at the top. You have to really be interested. What's the coolest thing today is more women who are in Congress or Parliament of different countries and stuff. It didn't used to be as much years ago. More women today are very vocally supportive of other women and policies. There will be some that are not, that try and stay away from that gender topic for reasons that they believe is helpful to them. But I am much more seeing women who are getting in those roles and then lifting other women to move into those roles as well. So just real quick, I'm looking at our time, it's moving along. I just wanted to give you some of the measures. If you're looking at country, comparing countries or regions of the world in terms of gender equality, this is one of them, is the United Nations Development Program, Human Development Reports. You can see this empowerment piece actually looks at heads of countries, but it also looks at economic and reproductive health. Of course, many of you are familiar with the World Economic Forum, the Global Gender Gap Report, which looks at political empowerment as well, but also, again, health, and educational attainment. So much research on the education, and different countries are different, but the more education, the better for the country in terms of gender roles and the health and safety of women and the empowerment of women themselves. This one is another one. I have 4 of, just in case you don't know about these indexes that really compare different countries. This OECD Development Center's social institutions and gender index. Looks at social institutions across 180 countries. And interestingly, some people have pushed back when I talked about this and said, why does discrimination in family matter? Oh my. That is, for the most part, many scholars are arguing now that everything in terms of discrimination starts in the family. Everything. The treatment of family members, the relationship between men and women, the power dynamics between women and men. And some scholars will argue if you fix, I don't think it's a wicked problem, so fixing is really hard, right? But if we really work on the family, right, then everything else will emerge up. It's an interesting thing to think about. So, and then the last measure that I think is really interesting to look at is the SDC Gender Index. And there's elements of gender. Most of you probably know the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And 14 of the 17 have, there's number 5, of course, that relates specifically to gender, but most of them, 14 of the 17 have some elements of gender. And so those are some, for those of you interested today to dig a little deeper on more broad topics, which again, I think is very connected to women as global leaders. And the more, generally speaking, the more, as I said a little bit on the pandemic, the more heads of state that are women, typically the whole governments have more women in them. And therefore you get more of the benefits that I mentioned in part 1. So then the last section today, really, I wanted to, what the research is quite clear about, and I've been writing on this for some time, is that actually the barriers and challenges that you see gender-wise and for women are similar. Well, there's some differences, but you see some level in all levels of where women are, whether they're global leaders, whether they're frontline workers, whether, you know, so many really impact. So understanding, digging deeper into the barriers that are in society that women face. And when women face barriers, it's not a women's issue. It's a family issue. It's a human issue. It's a community issue. Sometimes when we talk about childcare issues, they're like, well, let's help women. It's not about women. It's about families. It's about society. But you know how they get like deemed over to side things when reality, you know, it's a private issue. It's not a private issue. It's a public issue. These things are public issues. Jimmy Carter, in his book about 5 years ago, said the biggest challenge facing our world today is based on the presumption that men and boys are superior to girls and women. And I've used this quote a lot, and I say to people often, I've used it on Zoom a lot lately, and I've said to people, is that still the case in 2020? And if you look at what's happening around the world, not just in the States where I am, which it is definitely a problem, but in all countries around the world, it is still the biggest challenge facing our world today. And I think right with that is challenges around race and ethnicity as well. Some of the biggest, when you look at unconscious bias, and I teach a lot of unconscious bias. I'm not an expert in race, I'm an expert in gender, but you know, there are just, it's amazing how much of our life is unconscious, basically. And unless we bring more unconscious to consciousness, you know, it's hard to move forward with some of these issues. But I'm going to give you just a touch of a few things. In terms of this one, I really divide, and this is very simplistic, but I divide the women's, you know, challenges that we have really into internal and external. So I do a lot of work helping women find their own confidence. And sometimes people say that's a women. Well, a lot of that comes from socialization, the way we raise girls and boys differently. It's fascinating to look at. But this, and you might not be able to see this well, this is a chapter in my latest book from a few years ago on a chapter about barriers that I think is particularly good. It doesn't have all the barriers, but it helps us think about maybe some of the individual barriers that we have, like work and life conflict, the way we communicate differently, some of the confidence issues, not being, conscious, unconsciousness, but how those are really housed within and impact the organizational barriers that we find. Things like, the glass ceiling and glass clipped, and when women, lack mentoring or sponsorship, or some of the different things, the systems, harassment, different things. And then that's housed in society. And there's a lot more society issues. These are just some of the core ones. There's one that these researchers, who are great researchers, control of women's voices and the stereotypes that are around. So looking at those, they impact not only women at the front line, but women as global leaders, heads of organizations, heads of countries, heads of major companies, all of these things. So as we understand more about gender-based leadership barriers and barriers in general, we actually can help as we raise our own daughters or our granddaughters. I have a 20-month-old granddaughter that I have a terrible time not saying, oh, she's so cute, because she is so cute. But I'm trying not to make looks the first thing I say. I'm like, she's so smart and strong and cute too. Third thing, it's hard when you have these cute little granddaughters. So anyway, so in terms of just a few on each side, in terms of internal barriers, sometimes we talk about things like perfectionism. And women often do not, less than men, we found in research, don't really understand their gifts and strengths and talents. We're socialized to be humble, and women oftentimes think that's being small, but actually humility is just being teachable. And we can be teachable and know our gifts and strengths and talk about those and be confident at the same time. But there's misunderstanding. Imposter syndrome is so big. This one is, I put this picture for rumination. Sometimes we ruminate more as women in our perceptions of inequality as well. But on the other hand, we all have biases and assumption, and gender and race are at the core, and age are the biggest three, and we all have it. And most people think, I have people all the time saying, oh, I might have a few unconscious biases. Oh my gosh, when you look at the research, most of what we do is unconscious. And we do a lot, and we're just socialized into doing that. So I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to cruise along. But that unconscious bias, if you look at this at bottom definition, what's sometimes called implicit bias, is mental connections or associations without awareness, intention, or control. Now I'm using these terms because they impact women's leadership. That's what we know. They impact other things as well. But when we're looking for how we can help get more women leaders, support more women leaders, all of those, unconscious bias. I didn't used to believe this. And then about 8 years ago, I said, I gotta study this a lot more, because it is at the base of everything I'm doing in terms of gender. And then there's really some differences between, in fact, I didn't like to use the word sexism, and now I use it all the time because it is so every place. I mean, it's just every place. And what a lot of times people don't understand is the difference, though, between hostile sexism, which is still there and it still impacts women at all levels, which is more, sexual harassment, inappropriate jokes, saying, oh, that's women's work. Oh, she's a great employee, but let's give him a raise because he's got a wife at home or something. Those things are hostile sexism. But the research is coming out that benevolent sexism is so much of an impact and still impacts women at even upper levels, like women as global leaders. So understanding these things can help us propel forward more women as leaders. benevolent sexism comes from a place of really caring and goodness, but it really protects women, has them, really have less opportunities. A thing like Tracy, I'm seeing your face here, so I'll use you. Maybe you have a boss that's a man, and he has a really great event with some high folks in Parliament, some CEOs, and you work for him, and maybe you have 3 kids at home, and you've worked all day, and he's like, "Oh, Tracy, it'd be great to go to this event." Oh, but she's got 3 kids at home, and she's worked all day. She's done great stuff already. I don't even want to ask her because it might be hard on her. So it's not being rude, but that Tracy then doesn't get that opportunity for key networking and so forth. There's so many examples I could give you of this, but really it is making assumptions and not providing, even though it's subtle and most people don't know they're doing it, and it's not always meant to women, mostly meant to women. But when women understand and men understand what benevolent sexism is, it actually helps change things in the way we behave. And actually, even though it might be subtle, it makes quite a difference. I'm going to skip through this. Some other barriers that we see, like like just societal expectations, role congruency, which means, oh, men do this, women do this, men should be responsible, women, different things. Gender expectations, women, women can't get angry like men can, right? And especially women of color, I should say, especially Black women. They have a double whammy if they ever get angry in the workplace, but men are typically okay doing that. Focus on appearance. Oh my heck. There's so much interesting data on that being a barrier, because so many, and you saw that play out, especially with Hillary Clinton when she was running for office. They just go to how she looks more than anything else. And our perceptions, women still, we often in different settings can't be both competent and likable. So and men can be competent and likable together. So the wage gap, some different things like that. And then policies and practices. There's really biases in systems and processes. Practices like hiring and recruiting, and lack of opportunities and family relationships, lack of flexibility and family-friendly policies. Although I have to say the pandemic is doing a lot for family-friendly and flexibility kinds of things. So, and even with words, right? There's an expectation that men and women are similar when you use the word ambition or success. But the research is finding that those words actually mean different things for women. Oftentimes with men, they're really the career ladder. But for women, it's more up and out. Women's ambition is, yes, I want to be promoted. And I also want to be a good mother if they're a mother. And I want to be engaged in the community. It's not all about this. There's more things. So success to a woman often, and some of the best research, by the way, comes out of the UK with some of my colleagues who work in the UK on this. And even small things like the way we use words. Girl is interesting. That girl is really 12 years old and younger. Yet oftentimes they'll say that man and the girl. And there's fascinating research, even as doctors, here's Dr. Jones, here's Dr. Smith, Dr. Whatever. And then there's a woman doctor and they say, and Laura, and don't use the Dr. Jones. So those things really do impact as women move into those leadership roles, or lack of women moving into those leadership roles. And then lastly, and then I've just got one quote to end. I know there's a few questions, and I can only stay for this first hour. I've got other conflicting events. But I thought this would be interesting for you to look at. This also comes out of my 2017 book on gender consciousness. So think about organizations. So where is your government, or your city council, or your nonprofit, or your school? I mean, it could be in anything. So is it, or if we're low awareness of gender and the differences, low awareness, low action, gender unconsciousness, is it a lot of action, but little awareness? Like you do a lot of checking off the list, like let's do this, and that should solve the gender problems, right? High action, not unconscious bustle. Or is it up here? A lot of awareness, but not much going on, consciously unconscious. Or is it over here? And I'm seeing some groups, organizations, not very many governments, though, looking at high action, high awareness. So these things are really a wicked problem. But what we know is that even though it's so complex in terms of gender and women's and the equality and trying to get voices and stuff, the work around this matters. It really matters. Because what we know is when there's more women at the table, when there's more women's voices, that things change for individuals, things change for families, things change for communities, for businesses, for organizations. It's worth the effort to do both internal work for women themselves so they see themselves as future leaders, even when they're young, and then working on our policies and practices and public policies even as well, so that the systems and the organizations provide and change their culture to really have elements for both masculine and feminine, where men can continue to thrive as well as women. And women's voices can really emerge as important voices to influence organizations and societies in general. I love this. This is actually, there are 2 slides, and it comes from Nancy Adler's chapter as well. I really appreciate this. So former Czech Republic president, he described the world as going through a transitional period when something is on the way out and something else is painfully being born. During such a transition, it is not surprising that people worldwide are attracted to women leaders. Women leaders' symbolic message of bringing positive change, hope, and the possibility of unity. The interplay of women and men's styles of leadership will define the contours and potential success of the 21st century society. The risk is in encapsulating leaders, both women and men, in approaches that worked well in the 20th century, but foretell disaster for the 21st century. The challenge is in the urgency and complexity. However, as poet David White enjoins us, the journey begins right here in the middle of the road, right beneath your feet. This is the time. There is no other place. There is no other time. I think that's a great quote to end with. I do love this. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And I really do believe that as we work on women's voices and start with those girls and help them really find their voice and their influence and their impact, that as we move up the line into women as more global leaders in any setting I'm talking about, in business, in nonprofit, in government, any setting, that we will see things change for the better. And today, with more wicked problems during the pandemic than we've ever seen in our lifetime, for most of us, this is more than ever before. We need women and men in equal numbers working together to change things for the better. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your talk and time, Professor Susan Madsen. We really appreciate that. And we have a few questions for you. You ready? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The first one is, being a leader is challenging, not to mention of being a female leader. And the question now for you is, how have you managed to navigate your direction to this position now, leadership, in terms of being a global leader yourself?
Oh, in terms of for myself then, I just think for me, and I'm a scholar, so this is very, but I know others that are not scholars, but the more I learn, the better I do. So for me, the biggest advice, I think, and the answer to that question would be, I continue to learn and I continue to challenge myself on my biases, right? So the more that I learn and grow myself, the more I challenge myself, I think the more that I can hear and I can see what's going on around me. And I look a lot and observe other people and the best things I see from other people. And there's some good leaders around us right now. So I think that's what I would say. Learning and listening. And then, oh, one more thing, getting outside my comfort zone. So we as women often stay in our comfort zones more than men, but but when we get out of our comfort zone and learn and grow, that's the best place to learn and grow, is outside our comfort zone.
Thank you for that response. The next one is, what are your main leadership strategies?
For myself?
Yeah.
I am very strategic. Well, first of all, one of my strategies and what I suggest to other people is this, is understand your gifts and strengths. That's hard for some women to do, but I have worked on this for a number of years. I love the Gallup Strengths Finder. So I am very strategic. So there's so many things I can do, but I think one of my biggest strategies is to understand what I'm good at, what I love, where my heart is, right? And then bring good people around me who have strengths and things that I am not good at, or I don't really like, or I'm not passionate about, but that needs to be done. So I do talk to a lot of people and try to help. I'm very giving my resources and time to other people. And some people would say, well, that's, you're too busy, or you should say no more, or things like that. But in the work I do, which is to really strengthen the impact of girls and women, that is a strategy I've chosen to do, to try and be helpful to as many people as possible. And most of that is just good free stuff. I speak and do things for people for free. So that's been, but I've been blessed. I'm very spiritual and religious person. I believe in God, and I believe that I've been blessed with the really good mind to do strategy and see where the problems are, and then have courage to step forward and really use my voice.
Thank you very much for that. And I really appreciate that, because what you are doing with us right now at GSEP is you are giving us this stuff for free. We really appreciate that as well. The next question is, how can organizations reframe their business practices to empower more women?
Oh, that's a huge question. There are so many good resources out there. Actually, that's the first thing, is really look at the research already. One of the things that a lot of organizations do is they go with their gut. They say, oh, let's just go with our gut. Oh, I think that would work. What I'm saying these days to organizations is that doesn't work. It really, I mean, you're hit and miss. There's really great resources out there, some great books. There's a great one out of Harvard called What Works, in terms of gender equality, that takes research and good theory and then takes best practices, puts them all together, and then gives them out. So don't go with your gut, but look at best practices, look at what the research, then combine that with what you're seeing about your own culture to make really good decisions. There are great resources and research out there in turn, just for one example, in human resource areas, just changing job descriptions for recruiting practices so they're not gendered in their language. Sounds simple, but the research is quite clear about that the way job descriptions are can really, have women not apply, or if they apply, not even negotiate. The more transparent, the better in terms of women. So that's just one example. But I would say, remember those two elements. I said internal barriers. So those companies that really do have research evidence-based women's opportunities for women to develop within all women's settings, those are quite powerful. But things to develop women's confidence, but also looking at those structures. So that's a huge, that would be a many day conference to even get down to the bottom of that question. But hopefully that gave you a couple of ideas.
Definitely, yes. The other one we would like you to touch on is, what are the policies that the government, can implement to empower more women to become global leaders?
So on that one, you're talking about like government policies?
Yeah.
Okay. So interestingly, I am right now working on the transition team in the state of Utah for the new governor. And I am the voice on gender policy. So this is good timing. And I've looked at some of I just read a couple of weeks ago, an article on policies related to SDG, the United Nations, work. So one of the policies that I'm thinking, well, there's a number of them. First of all, some of the ones that I've seen, particularly in the United States on some other states, is a few policies related to the wage gap, which is really an important thing for women. So one of them is we're recommending in the state of Utah, is for the state government to start by doing a really good gender analysis of pay. So do research, get the real data. What does it look like? And people get really nervous about that, but people who do the analysis, economists, know how to do it where it's really apples to apples. So see where you're at. There's a policy that can be a policy recommendation. Another one that's had some success in other places is just kind of a public policy around not asking the question in state government, but also businesses, what is your previous salary? So that question actually is an anchoring bias and disadvantages women, right? And then another area in terms of public policy is childcare. So childcare, the lack of childcare, the struggle, the cost of childcare also can be very limiting for women's advancement in career. And oftentimes people, and in other countries, I'm again, my perspective is on the policy pieces specifically, is very US oriented. So other countries are very different. But oftentimes people say, well, that's a private issue. It's a family private issue. It's not a public issue. But the research is very supportive that it is a public issue. Good child care is a public issue. So there's many things related to tax incentives and many approaches that different organizations or countries are taking. But public policy around childcare is one of those things that's important. So there's many others. Public policies for more support on victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, those kinds of things can also be helpful. There's so many good public policies that have been shown in different countries to start really moving the needle and helping. So those are a few.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. We really appreciate those comments on the policy recommendations. We have one more question for you, and that is, how have you managed to combine multiple roles as a woman, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a professor?
Oh, that's a tough question too, because when we get into that as women, we're like not very nice to ourselves. We're like, we don't have it all, because we know we can see that. But I'll tell you that that I've done. I have 4 children, but they're older now, so they've all been out of the house for about 7 years. So my life has definitely changed since then. But I multitasked a lot. And I did things at the same time. So I did have a career that I had some flexibility. So I've always telecommuted or teleworked from home. I've been a professor for a couple of decades. So I go in to teach, but I've always had flexibility to, and I start working early in the morning. So I would get 3 or 4 hours in before my kids got up and get them to school or whatever. So I've always tried to be involved with my kids, and I've coached them in sports through the years and done different things. But I work a lot. And so some of my kids have been critical. Let's like my youngest said, you never made me lunches. I gave him money like to buy food at school. So he's a little resentful that I didn't make homemade lunches for him. But you know what I felt, what helped me through the years is that I feel, and whether you're religious or spiritual or not, there's research, and I've published on women and calling. So it can be from God or what, a higher power, or people that are not religious can still feel this call, this I'm made to do certain things. For me, I am religious and spiritual. I separate those two sometimes. And I feel absolutely called from God to do the work that I do. And when you feel that as strongly as I do, then you know, even if things are not perfect, even if your kids are complain a little bit at you, even though you get some criticism from different sides, if you feel called, and whatever that means to you, you just move forward and you do the best you can do. And that has brought me, to be honest, that has brought me, even through some tears with trying to manage so much, that has brought me great peace, that I'm doing what I'm supposed to, and I can impact girls and women and others the best way I can do. And that in the way I believe, my faith, that God is behind me and my choices.
Thank you very much, Professor Madsen. We really appreciate sharing your experience and expertise with us. Thank you very much for your insightful contributions. Have a nice day. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. We now call on our respected lecturer in the room in the name of Dr. Bruno Roque. He is an active researcher as well as a business consultant at a university in London here in the UK. And Dr. Bruno will help us to provide exploratory insight into the question, how can we empower the youth and the young adults to become global leaders? The floor is all yours. Please start when you are ready.
Thank you very much. I can share the slides?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can share.
Okay. Let me see. Okay, perfect. Okay, good. Thank you very much. I want to share my research on global leadership, and this can be applied to youth, but also this can be applied to any age, because there are principles that will be very useful for younger people and younger adults, but also can be applied to any age. So, and there are principles that are based on global leadership, but also what I call is compassionate leadership. This is based on my new book, that is The Art of Compassionate Business, that was published last year by Ruth Leach. And in this book, this is the result of 4 years research on principles that can make leaders much more human-oriented, leaders that can connect to people in a much more meaningful way. We will see that there is a lack of compassion in the world, not only in the world, but also in the workplace, in the business environment. And we will analyze this, and I will try to give youngsters practical tips, actionable tips for them to use in any of the activities that are leading other people. So first of all, we have to define compassionate leadership. We know that leaders are important in any type of environment, corporate environment or any type of social environment, and youngsters are the future, are the bridge between the present and the past and the future scenarios that we are to imagine. And I feel that leaders should be aware of these principles that are, I call this principle perennial or timeless. We can see that in the world there is a lack of compassion, and there is also a lack of compassionate leaders. Why? Because we have wars, we have some maladies, we have a lot of unemployment, companies that are firing employees mercilessly. You see also that in the business environment, in some cases, companies are competing in a very unethical way. For example, poaching employees, poaching talent from other companies, or in some cases, developing some strategies of espionage to get some information from other companies. But also, you see also that in the workplace, there is a lack of compassion. For example, you see a lot of what we call the dark side of politics, one-upmanship, favoritism. You see also turf wars. You see also, in some cases, backbiting. So the world doesn't look very positive. Moreover, many especially would say that the world look a bit gloom, and it look like a bit negative. The outlook of this current world is quite negative. However, I have a lot of hope, because leaders are the most important, one of the most important factors in a society, and youngsters are the future. We need young, compassionate leaders. Then I will give you some example of companies that also there, some of the managerial positions are taken by youngsters that are using a compassionate leadership approach. So we can say that all the picture of our current world look very gloomy. Lack of compassion on a world level, on a business level, on the corporate level. However, there are some authors from my research. I observe that people are naturally hardwired to behave in a compassionate manner with others. This is part of our DNA. Our prehistoric ancestors tend to gather in groups to protect one another from predators, to get some food, to get some shelter. So these bonds of affinity are part of our essence. And we have to be aware of these important traits. And another author like Griffith observed that the human beings have an instinctive orientation to behave in an unconditional, selfless, all-loving, cooperative, moral way. You see a lot of competition. You see competition in politics, a candidate competing with another candidate. You see competition in the work environment, many candidates for only one position. You see competition between companies, but I think that we need much more cooperation. Cooperation implies is a very important concept related to compassion. Cooperation means supporting one another, helping one another. You see some companies are approaching this from the cooperative perspective. Why? Because they are developing some alliances with other companies that formerly were competitors. So Nokia and Ericsson is one example of company that were developing alliances in the past, and they were very successful. But why should youth aim for compassionate leadership? What is what are the fundamentals? What are the reasons? What is the rationale behind compassionate leadership? I have some definition in my book about compassion. I use the word in my book also. I use the word love in the business environment. When I give some talk to entrepreneurs and some corporate clients, they're a bit surprised that I use the word love and compassion. They tell me, love and compassion doesn't have anything to do with the corporate world. We are here for profit. But we will see from our analysis that compassion is very adequate to any environment, business environment, close circles, like our close relationship, like friend, family, like relatives, but also can be applied to the world in general, to politics, to any social environment. Compassion is a continuous care for oneself and others. So it's not only that you're focusing only on yourself, but also you are caring for others. And because we are all interconnected, the famous author Stephen Covey observed that we are all interconnected within a company, within a society, within a city, a country, in the world. So we're not self-reliant as many people believe we are, but in any position that we have, we rely on others. So caring for others is a good approach. We're caring for others, and when you care for others, they tend to respond in similar ways. Compassion is the bridge that shortens distance between people, is an over demonstration of affection and support, and help people to communicate in a much more meaningful way. And it's the core element of any relationship, business one and non-business one. When I mentioned that I include the word love in my book, Love and Business, here I'm talking about a much more humanistic connotation of love, not the sentimental aspect of love that we hear commonly related to our close circle, friends, family, or a partner. Here we're talking about a much wider connotation of love, which includes generosity, support, compassion, empathy, support, care. And this is needed in the work environment, in the business environment, and in the world in general. We see challenges in the world that can be sorted out when we have a compassionate approach. And leaders should obviously talk about this overtly, but also should take the lead, should take initiative to spread this voice, not only orally, but also with example, should set the example, the right example for other people to follow. So what is going on? I try to apply this to the corporate world, but this can apply to any other type of environment. I like the previous speaker that he mentioned zero-sum game. Zero-sum game is widespread. Is applied to the corporate world. So for example, you see many companies, they try to sell products that are low quality, high price, and they try to deceive customer. They try to rip customer off. Well, this is a zero-sum game because the company is winning at the expense of customer. This is not an example of a compassionate leadership approach. Real compassionate leader look for win-win agreements where all parties are getting benefit from this deal. And they're looking also for long-term relationships that are sustainable and they're much more robust over time. Also in the corporate world, many companies are seen as threats. We see the word competitor, competing with others. And this means that one company will win at the expense of others. But why don't we think other companies as potential partners to gather into an alliance, to develop alliances that are fruitful and mutually beneficial? And you see also non-compassionate work environment with the dark side of politics. And in some cases, some people are treated like commodities. Employees, when their performance is not so good, they're discarded like replaceable pieces or parts by other employees. We are not acknowledging the human being. We're treating employees like resources that can be discarded. I don't like when people use, even I'm very critical with this, when people use the word human resources, because human resources won't be the right word to use when you're talking about people working for your company. It will be more appropriate to talk about human beings, because resources can be used and abused. And here we're talking about human beings that are contributing to the company's mission. We see a lot of conflicts in the business environment, conflict between companies and employees, companies and customers. This also show lack of compassion, show a lack of understanding of each other. And some would say that compassion, it doesn't apply to the business environment. And why people are resistant to apply compassion, especially business leaders, why they're resistant to apply compassion to the business environment? Because many of the words that we use in business, in the corporate world, but also in other environments, come from military disciplines. I feel that military disciplines have a specific function for a country to defend the sovereignty of this country, but in practice, this applied also to business environment. You see words like strategy, tactics, and when you use this vocabulary that come from military discipline, you convert this business environment and this workplace in a war zone. The war zone that companies are trying to beat one another, and also employees are trying to outpace one another to get a better position. This is not a behavior that is compassionate. Also in business, you see a lot of terms that are quantitative, market share, sales, profit, you don't see many terms that are qualitative. For example, camaraderie, compassion, support, care. Many businesses say that they have to only get profits, they have to get market share, sales. They don't have to care so much about relationship. But we have to understand that in the business environment, in any social environment, relationships are the key factor, are the key component of this environment. You cannot succeed in business, you cannot succeed in a society if you don't support others. Why? Because we are all interdependent. Company cannot succeed without customers, cannot succeed without employees, cannot succeed without the community, they cannot succeed with business partner. So they need the support from different stakeholders. So when companies are trying to focus only on these key performance indicators such as profitability, productivity, efficiency, they're missing the point. Why? Because they forget about nurturing this relationship with the stakeholders that are the key component of any business activity. And if company, instead of focusing on this indicator, focus on improving this relationship with the stakeholder, customer, supplier, employee, and others, this key performance indicator will tend to improve naturally. So as I mentioned, compassion in some cases, people relate this to close friends or relative family, but this can be applied to any environment, political environment, business environment, social environments. And this includes some important traits like connection, closeness, affinity, that are important for any type of relationship, including business ones. Some business leaders have observed that the importance of key performance indicators, but we said that these indicators are only to be achieved when you nurture relationships. And the relationship should be long-term relationship. I encourage young leaders and young leaders to be that they focus on nurturing relationships with different people that are relating to. This is so important because it's the pathway to success, the path to success. And not only you are strengthening this relationship and satisfying each other's needs, but also you are making up a better society. You are contributing to a better society. Why should leaders behave in a compassionate manner? What is the reason? What is the main reason? Why you see many leaders that are a bit they're related to some traits like grandiose, or some leader might appear, you see in the news, tyrannic, making the decision only in themselves, not inclusive. These are bad examples that are shown in the news, but you see a new generation of leaders that are much more human-oriented. Why should they be human-oriented, compassionate? First of all, because all people need affection, even people working for a company or people in any social environment. This is one basic human need. We need to be affectionate to one another. People not only should be treating others in a positive way, but also should avoid any type of negative behavior. For example, slandering, gossiping, criticizing. And this is so common in some environment, for example, political environment. One candidate slandering another political candidate. And also in the work environment, gossiping, slandering, backbiting, guilt tripping, not good. We will see research later on that when this environment is full of this negative behavior, people tend to be less productive and less connected to one another, less cooperative. A compassionate person also makes others feel at peace. How we call this from the research perspective, we call this psychological safety. Psychological safety means that others can be themselves. They can be in their own skin and they can be showing themselves authentically. They can be much more authentic, truthful, honest, and they can, when people are allowed to be themselves in the work environment, they tend to be much more cooperative. They tend to avoid all this negative state that we call freeze, fight, fly mode, and instead they tend to be much more connecting to one another. On the contrary, when people are not treated in a compassionate manner, they're prone to behaving in an anxious, restless, scared, and even aggressive manner. Imagine that an employee that is continually being criticized harshly by a boss, a leader in that company. Do you think that this employee will work over time? This employee might be anxious, fearful of being fired, fearful of being dismissed, fearful of making mistakes, and might be even less creative, less productive, and also might work by the book, might not work over time, might work just enough, and they might look for other job opportunities. So not being compassionate also bring about negative business results. As I mentioned, I am applying this only to the business environment, but this can be applied to political environment or social environment in general. Baumeister and other researchers observed that a person positive behavior, compassionate behavior toward others, such as very simple gestures like smiling, listening to them, supporting them when needed, will not affect the relationship with them as much as when this individual decreases negative, non-compassionate behavior toward others. So it's not only being implementing more compassionate behavior, using much more compassionate behavior in the work environment and in the business environment, in the social environment, but also avoiding any behavior that is non-compassionate. For example, frowning at others or insulting them or being aggressive. And this is so common nowadays that we see people, especially with the pandemic, are getting a bit anxious and being opinionated, but in a negative way, and in some cases expressing their opinions not in a kind way, but in an aggressive way. Gottman observed that the relationship can only succeed when the participants' positive interaction outnumber the negative ones by at least 5 to 1. So you have 5 positive interaction and only 1 negative interaction. This ratio is a ratio, according to this, especially that is suitable for any relationship to succeed. You see many relationships, close relationship, business relationship, and any type of relationship with, for example, acquaintances, you see that the ratio is not 5 to 1, but could be 1 to 1. People are behaving sometimes in a negative way and then in a positive way, and these tend to be imbalanced and tend to bring about the end of this relationship. So business is about relationship. Any social environment is about relationship. We have to care for the relationship. And compassionate attitude is the great pacifier and a harmonizer of any relationship with the stakeholders. When a company adopts a continuous attitude of compassion, they will try to prevent disagreement. This is nowadays we have a very conflicted society on a social level, political level, business level, and being compassionate implies trying to approach conflict from an amicable perspective, a friendly perspective. This means try to approach conflict in a way that everyone wins. All people involved are winning, not one will win at the expense of others. Many leaders, for example, the founder of Whole Foods, observed that the only agreements that are suitable in any business environment and also in any social environment are the win-win agreements. I like this research. There is a paper, a famous paper that's called What Love Have to Do With It. It's a famous paper, a business paper that Barsadi and O'Neill observed that the adoption of a compassionate attitude in the workplace, so this means when people are treating one another in a kind, supportive, loving, and caring way, tend to bring about increased customer satisfaction, higher employee satisfaction, lower absenteeism, lower turnover, and decreased stress level. All this impact positively on the bottom line, which means profit. So a company people, this is a brief summary of what is in my new book, The Art of Compassionate Business, but I try to highlight a few findings that are relevant, especially for young leaders that are the future. Compassionate people with a compassionate attitude are more emotionally intelligent. Daniel Goleman, the famous author of the book Emotional Intelligence, observed that compassion is one of the traits of emotional intelligence. That does not include only being aware of our own emotions, regulating our emotions and expressing them wisely, but also managing relationship and also being aware of the needs of others, being empathetic with others. Let me see the time. I don't want to exceed the time so much. Okay, we're okay. So what happens when you treat people in a compassionate way? When you treat people in a compassionate way, there is a famous principle that is called the principle of reciprocity. Robert Cialdini, a famous social psychologist, observed that the law of reciprocity always applies. There is no exception. This is quite simple to understand. I'll give you an example. When a leader, a business leader, treats people that are led by this leader in a compassionate way, in a caring and supportive way, these people tend to act in a reciprocal way. This is what we call the law of reciprocity. This means they tend to reciprocate. They tend to respond in a similar way. For example, supporting this leader vision, supporting this leader mission. The opposite happens when the leader is non-compassionate. When the leader acts in a non-compassionate way, for example, tyrannic, or for example, non-inclusive, not allowing people to express their opinions. In this case, people will react also in a negative way, will tend to reciprocate, but in a negative way, will tend to withdraw, will tend not to cooperate, will tend to dismiss the leader directions. To put it simply, compassionate leaders seek mutual satisfaction of the needs of all involved. There are many models of needs, Maslow pyramid of needs. We all have physical needs, emotional needs, mental needs, spiritual needs, social needs, environmental needs. And many leaders, especially in the business environment, focus only on the economic needs. They don't care so much about emotional needs. And we see that with the pandemic, many people have very important emotional needs. They feel anxious, they feel not protected, they feel like on their own. In some cases, they feel dismissed. So leaders should take the lead and try to care for their people, not only giving job opportunities, but also checking out how they are on a continuous basis. I see some companies that are having one weekly meeting only to talk about non-business topics. Why? Because they want to check that everyone is on board and everyone is healthy from the emotional and mental perspective. Because if the human being is not feeling well, this worker won't be contributing in the best way to this company. Compassionate leaders also develop affinity bonds with others. Well, Hamilton observed that we need to belong to groups. This is a biological need. Well, it's important, especially in these pandemic times, to foster group work that implies fostering collective effort, cooperative approaches in any business activity. People feel supported with one another, and also compassionate leader will look for harmonization of relationship, solving conflicts in a peaceful way, recognize and validate others, acknowledging their contribution. I always say that compassionate leaders are generous. They acknowledge, for example, if the leader sees that the other people have worked over time to contribute to the company's mission, well, they can send to this person a thank you note by email or handwritten thank you note and hand sign, so that they can demonstrate their appreciation for this employee contribution. Compassionate leaders also look for commonality. We always focus so much on differences. We're all human beings. This is our main commonality. We all have dreams, expectations, we have fears, we have hopes, we have setbacks, we have successes. So it's always look for commonality. There is so much discrimination based on race, religion, and other aspect in society. And why don't we focus much more on commonalities? Psychologists observe that when we focus on commonalities, trust and cooperation bonds tend to build up. And also leaders tend to praise others. As I mentioned, generous with their words, praise not only the person's traits, but many others will say that is not so correct, but praise the person's process, the contribution, the effort that they made to become better. Leaders also acknowledge the emotional side of others. In many environments, especially the work environment, you cannot talk about your own emotion. This is a de-emotionalized environment. You can only talk about rational aspect, achieving goals achieving objectives, developing budget. Everything is focused on rational, but we are rational and emotional beings. So we have to be more balanced. Compassionate leaders support others. I recently wrote an article about the importance of supporting others during the pandemic, and this implies that why we have to support others, because we try to understand that everyone has challenges, and when people make mistakes, it's important not to be negatively critical or harshly critical. Instead, trying to be understanding, try to provide with valuable feedback, but also try to orient this person to the future improvement. Try to show the way for them to change in a positive way. Try to provide them with tools, for example, mentoring, tutoring, coaching, so that they can change in a positive way. Well, compassionate leaders have also positive assumption about one another. So there is a famous effect called Pygmalion effect that implies when you have assumption about others that are positive, well, these compassionate leaders will see others. For example, if you believe that a compassionate leader believes that others are capable of doing the work, these leaders will see that the people that are being led by this leader are more prone to behave accordingly to this expectation, to this assumption. Compassionate leaders also respect others. They try not to make people lose faith. Faith is important. People want to feel, try to avoid people in the work environment, in the business environment, in the social environment, try to avoid any situation that can make them feel ashamed or can they make them feel diminished or deprecated. Well, and also try to avoid situations where their autonomy is restricted. So respecting others implies granting others autonomy to give their opinions, to act in the way they consider appropriate according to their skills and knowledge and experiences, but also try to make them feel safe, psychologically safe, means at ease, relaxed, protected. Compassionate leaders also act with integrity, avoid manipulation of others, avoid any type of stratagem that are trying to cajole others to obtain their own objectives. And leaders are generous and grateful with others. We mentioned that this is very important. Now, what are the traits of companies led by compassionate leaders? Well, companies led by in a compassionate manner, these following characteristics are common. The organization does not attempt to deceive customers. Companies that are led by compassionate leaders are customer-oriented. They try to get the best value for customers. They try to care for customers. They have a very big number of loyal customers that don't have even to be convinced to come back to this company because they already know that this company is acting in the best way with them. But companies do not also consider other organizations as enemies to defeat, but also they can consider as potential partners or sources of information, or in some cases you can consider other companies as examples to emulate. The organization also does not try to de-skill employees. When the organization has a compassionate leader, doesn't try to de-skill. Instead, they're trying to enhance the employees' skills, natural skills. I like the previous speaker that commented about the strengths. The organization tries to harness these unique strengths that every person has. The leader is a steward of these employees' strengths, unique strengths, and try to harness and try also to, for this employee to apply these strengths, talents, unique skills to a specific task that contribute to the company's mission. This company doesn't have also high profit as a goal, but they focus on what we call the triple bottom line. Profits, caring for profit, caring for people, which is very important, customers, suppliers, employee, community members, but also caring for the planet. This means caring for the natural resources, being environmentally friendly, being, for example, using renewable sources of energy, recycling. This organization doesn't treat employees like cogs in a machine. They treat them as valuable human beings. And the company look for natural, hearty ways to communicate with the stakeholders. For example, I always say to my clients, it's important for you to look for more direct ways of communication. Why send an email if you can have a phone call? It's more human oriented. Why you send a memo if you can have a virtual meeting with these people? So try to develop trust and cooperation bonds with others. This means much more human oriented bonds. When a company adopts a compassionate attitude, try to handle conflict in a conciliatory fashion, means in a peaceful, amicable fashion, and company try to look at diverse opinions in the work environment. This applies to any environment. Compassionate leaders, and this is important for all youngsters, are open to other views. They are not only, they have a very important vision and mission to follow through, but also they're open to other ideas. They're not stubborn. They're nurturing their minds with ideas from others. So they're very inclusive and they're open to different and diverse opinions. Some example of organization led in a compassionate manner. We're wrapping up here. Well, you have some organization like Dell, the computer giant, is a good example of a company that adopt a loving attitude to different stakeholders. They have a legacy good plan, and this company is continually committed to reducing carbon dioxide emission. We saw the triple bottom line, caring for profit, people, planet. Here they're acting in a compassionate way, but also this organization commit to helping communities through contribution of millions of hours of service, as well as technology and expertise. And this company also develop an inclusive and inspiring work environment. So allow people to express their opinion and also allowing them also to work flexible hours, which is very important in these pandemic times. Some company like Google that obviously is a well-known, is also another example of a compassionate company with a loving attitude. Remember, loving attitude here we're talking about from much more humanistic perspective, a wider connotation of love. This organization has a lot of philanthropic projects, support communities. They provide communities with grants. They have volunteering projects. In some cases, they provide community with knowledge and technological products. They support communities. Communities is one of the most factors in this company's strategy and mission. In Google, employees are also treated in a compassionate way. They have savory food in the workplace, but also they are allowed to use some services, in some cases free, like a hairdresser or physiotherapist, legal advice. I remember a company that is not mentioned there, Patagonia, and I was surprised when I read this the other day. Patagonia is a cloth company also that is a compassionate company. They provide free child care on site for workers, free child care for workers working for that company, for them to be relaxed, at ease, not to think about child care, worrying about the cost of child care. This is free as part of their position. Company like Southwest Airlines, low-cost airline, also is being compassionate. Why? Because they don't try to manipulate people. They offer the price that is clear without ancillary charges, very clear and can be compared very easily on the website, and is supported by millions of people worldwide. Honesty is a company that provides with organic tea, another example of company that has organic ingredients. This means that they do not pollute the environment. They don't use pesticide or preservative or any chemical products, everything natural. But also this company also develop fair trade agreements. What are fair trade agreements? Are agreements that try to develop win-win relationship with a specific community, especially undeveloped communities of undeveloped or less developed countries. And this company also developed partnership with other beverages companies like Coca-Cola. Remember, other companies are considered not as competitive but as potential partners. Tom's is another example of a company that every pair of shoes that is sold by this company, they do not donate one more pair of shoes to communities. So they're donating one pair of shoes for every pair of shoes sold by this company. This is called the program 1 for 1. Why do we need to be more compassionate? Why do we need compassionate leadership? To wrap up, youngers need to lead others in a compassionate way because it's the only way to change the world. We have seen countless examples of non-compassionate leaders bringing about wars, bringing about maladies, bringing about unemployment, bringing about economic crisis. We saw in the business environment, we saw a lot of non-compassionate leaders bringing about companies going bankruptcy, company deceiving customers, company getting with the resources of customers and stakeholders, company misleading with the information. We saw countless examples, and also in the workplace, we see also continually in the news example of companies that have a non-compassionate workplace, the dark side of politics. So the only way to solve this problem is to use an opposite approach. We know that this doesn't work. It doesn't create a better society. So youngsters need to lead others in a compassionate manner because it's the only way to change the world, the business environment, and any type of environment. Covey, I like this author, Stephen Covey, the famous best-selling author, observed there is a need of constant interdependence with all people. I like to paraphrase a very, very famous thinker that observed, no man is an island. And I want to say, no company is an island, and no individual is an island. We need each other. We need support from each other. And companies cannot thrive without customers. Companies cannot thrive without employees, community members, or business partners. If companies focus only on profits and dismiss all this relationship, companies are more prone to go bankrupt or out of business or being outpaced by other companies. Instead, when companies nurture this relationship, companies are more prone to achieve this key performance indicator. So I want to finalize this talk with a very famous quote from Einstein that observed that the human being is part of the whole that we call the universe. It's important in some cases we feel separate from one another, and it's important to understand that when we feel isolated from one another, separate from one another, this is like a kind of prison. It's restricting us to connect to one another and also to develop trust and cooperation bond with others. In this prison, we're not understanding that we're all interconnected. This is a very brief interpretation. I'll leave the quote there for you to read much more thoroughly. But Einstein, the famous Nobel Prize scientist, recognized the need of interconnectedness. This is our natural essence, and this can apply to any environment. Some references are mentioned there, and also some websites that I took into account. This is also based on my new book that became a best-selling book, that is The Art of Compassionate Business, Main Principle for the Human-Oriented Enterprise, published by Routledge. And this is my website if you want to know more about me. And thank you for your attention. I tried to be respectful of the time. They told me around 40 minutes. So, and I think that I was very respectful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your talk and time. We appreciate your critical thought as well on compassionate leadership. Thank you so much. I have a few questions for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please.
The first one is, how can one develop him or herself to become an outstanding global leader?
Well, very important. The most outstanding characteristic of a global leader is generosity and gratitude. I see that many people tend to act in an opposite way. Why we need to be generous and grateful? Because when you're generous and grateful, you get others on board. A leader is a person that is leading other people. There is no leaders without people being led. So the only way, the shortcut to get people on board, to cooperate to your purpose, to your mission, to contribute to your mission, is to be generous and grateful. But when you say generous, when I say generous, some people say, what are you talking about? You have to give people money to follow you? No. Here we're talking about a much wider connotation of generosity. Generosity could be focused on tangible aspect, for example, a global leader, a leader that is leading a multinational company with operation worldwide, can be generous from the tangible perspective, for example, offering bonuses to those employees that are contributing to the company's objective, and they're working overtime, they're giving their best. But also the leaders can also give other things that are intangible. For example, support, leaders will recognize that people have challenges. So in this challenging time, for example, during the pandemic, leaders will recognize that people need other arrangement at work, for example, working from home or remote control, remote working, or for example, flexible hours, or in some cases, part-time working. Well, leaders recognize other needs because when you are generous, you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about others, but also appreciative. So generosity is the first trait, means focusing on others and try to give instead of receive. Many leaders tend to always get. They try to get more profit, more market share, more sales, more customer, and this creates an imbalance. There should be a balance between getting and giving. But I was saying that the second trait will be being more grateful. Both concepts are important. There is a lot of research on gratefulness, gratitude, and the researchers observe that when people are grateful, the person that is grateful feels better, and the person that is appreciated is also feeling better, and any witness that is witnessing this act of appreciation is also feeling better. So being grateful with others creates a better emotional environment, a better emotional tone in any context or environment, create a better workplace, create a better political environment, create a better community. Instead, when you're ungrateful, you are not acknowledging other people's contribution. Why? Because you are dismissing their contribution. You show lack of sensitivity to their contribution, and when people are not acknowledged, tend to withdraw. They tend to not to cooperate. Remember the principle of reciprocity. So how you can be thankful to others? Well, many researchers, for example, Carol Dweck observed that you should focus when you're grateful, when you're praising people, you should focus on the process, not only on traits, preferably focus on the process. So for example, if the employees work a lot for this company, the leader that realizes work, for example, 2 hours additionally every day. The leader, for example, the manager working for that company will recognize this and also will say to this employee, thank you for your huge contribution to this company. They're not highlighting the employee characteristic, but they're highlighting the process and the whole contribution of this employee. By being grateful, you're not only appreciating the other people's contribution, but you are appreciating the person. We need to be validated by other people. This is a basic human need. And leaders that are compassionate know that people need to feel validated. They do so, they try to validate people by being much more generous and grateful. These are the 2 main traits that I highlight for any global leader. So, and I feel that any global leader that comply with these 2 requirements are more likely to be well known and recognized on a societal level.
Thank you for that response, Dr. Bruno Cignacco. The second question for you is, actually you've mentioned it briefly. I grabbed some of their pieces when you mentioned global leaders need to be more open, to be more open to others' views, yeah, as well as, have that diverse opinions. Yes. And in what ways can a global leader...
Very important question. Thank you very much for this question. If on a corporate level, for example, you can find, for example, that companies should check different opinions of different employees working for that company with surveys. For example, they might have frequent surveys that could be anonymous, or could be where the people can put their names on the, for example, questionnaire. And they should let employees know that their opinion will be taken into account, because people want to know that they count, that they're taken into account and their opinion counts. Many leaders believe that they know it all, they know everything, and this is a very arrogant position of a leader. Is not a compassionate leader. Arrogant leaders tend to act in a non-compassionate way. Instead, when people are open-minded, leaders are open-minded, they tend to learn from anyone working for this company. I know leaders that learn from, for example, people working for the administrative team, from the janitor cleaning the toilet, or from the person that is keeping the building secure and safe. So anyone can be a source of important learning. So, and this applies to any environment, not only leaders in the corporate environment. we can always learn from one another. And I feel that our experience on Earth is a learning experience. We are here to learn from one another. We can always get more insight. For example, I learned a lot from the previous talk, and I'm very enthusiastic also about the next talk. So we can always learn. We don't have to believe that we learn, we know it all. And this is what some Oriental philosophy called the beginner's mind. When you are open to other opinion, you are more open to other side of the specific topic, other perspective. You always have blind spots. So, and leaders that are compassionate know that they have blind spots, or we all have this blind spot. So when they're open to other opinion, they can improve not only their view on the topic, but also they can improve the business performance. Who will know more about customer than people that are dealing with customer? So it will be a bit arrogant of a leader to take only their own opinion without checking with people that are in the customer department if we want to implement a strategy that is customer oriented. So, and companies should also look for meetings that are cross-departmental, means people from different departments and where can express different opinions. People from the finance department, people from the administrative department, people from the production department, people from the marketing department. So you hear different views from different perspectives, from different departmental perspectives. This is the short answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you for that response to the inclusion and diversity question. That is really in-depth. The next one I have for you is going to be based on political leadership. And we're going to relate that to the current one in the United States. And the question goes, reflecting on Kamala Harris, the vice president to be, political leadership position as the first female vice president, what impact will such change in leadership have on the future global leaders?
This is important. This is important. I think that I mentioned this before. Everyone has their own contribution. Women and men, even will say that we are equal. We can have our own perspective on things that are, in some cases, I believe that we complement each other. We create a synergistic alliance when we work together. I think that having more women in any position is important. And also, not only from the perspective of gender, but from the perspective of religion and race, I feel that I don't want to take any position on the political issues in the United States, but I will say that any new government that is inclusive, in a new situation that includes much more variety of groups and genders and also races and also religion, tend to be much richer. Why? Because diversity and inclusion, talking about gender, talking about race, religion, create much more perspective on the topic. I feel that this new government is more prone, if it continues to be inclusive, to be much more creative with the challenges that the United States have. Some challenges that are very, very harsh and very difficult to resolve, like in some cases racism or discrimination in certain areas, or some violence in the streets. So I feel that there could be a much more refined balance, including not only women, but including also participants from different groups, for example, races, religion, or other political views. And I think that inclusion is always beneficial. We have, in some cases, like I like the previous speaker that talked about unconscious bias. Well, there is an unconscious bias to stereotyping. And for example, some will say, oh, women act this way, or this race act this way, or this religion act this way, or this nationality act this way. And this is a completely made up belief of the mind, because we cannot categorize people in these closed boxes or circles. We have to understand every human being, women, men, black people, white people, Chinese, whoever, any religion, have their own view that is of value for the prosperity of a country, for the prosperity of a nation, for the prosperity of a company, for the prosperity of a community. So I feel that anything that is related to inclusiveness and inclusion is very, very promising, I would say.
Thank you very much. It's all about inclusion and diversity. Thank you very much for that additional comment. And I have another question for you. And I've put up that slide, if you can see this slide. And the question is that just a further reflection on what this quote is. What I want young women and girls to know is you are powerful and your voice matters. You are going to walk into many rooms in your life and career where you may be the only one who looks like you, but you are not alone. So reflecting on this quote, what advice can you give to youth and other individuals with inspiration for political leadership?
Okay, very important. To youngsters, I will say, try to always connect to your innermost talents. You're here on the world to contribute to others in the very special way, according to your gifts, according to your talents. Your talents are unique. In some cases, you have to work in activities that are not necessarily related to your talent, but for example, for a livelihood or to pay the bills. And this is important to have an economic sustenance, but at the same time, try to devote time to develop project or perform activities that are connected to your talents. For example, if you are connected to artistic discipline, try to devote part of the week to this artistic discipline. If you are very keen on volunteering and helping social communities, try to devote some part of the week to this, because your contribution counts. Many young people believe that even young people are much more connecting and social oriented than old people, for the reason we see the upburst and the upsurge of social media. But however, many young people also believe that they might not count. The small contribution of them might not make a difference. And I want to tell them, from my experience when I was younger, that I believe so at that moment, but the experience showed me the opposite, that everything counts. It's like a little grains on sand on a beach. You might be very tiny and you don't see the different individually, but they all make the whole. So we need leaders and we need youngsters that are passionate, they have a purpose that is meaningful, that they can contribute with their unique talents in a purposeful way, and they try to not only make a better society but make a better world. So I always focus on your skills and nurture your skills. Do not believe so much what the negative news tell you that you cannot fulfill your dreams. If you are passionate, you are persistent, and you do not give up, but you are resilient, you are very prone to achieve your dreams. Try to focus always on your uniqueness. I will ask this young leader to be, what do I like? What do I want? What are my main talents? What are my main capabilities? What type of activities can I perform to nurture, to harness these talents and skills? And also, how can this activity contribute to others? Remember, that it's not only harnessing your skill, but it's also contributing to the social environment, bringing about positive effect to the world. So this is very important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bruno. Roque, Cignacco, we really appreciate your time and we appreciate your critical perspectives on youth as global leaders. Thank you very much. Please wait behind for the panel
Thank
discussion.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With prestigious honor, I will now call on Tracy Turner. Tracy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Tracy?
Thank you, Dr. Mandela. Can you share the screen, please?
Yeah. I just want to give them a brief about your profile, yeah? Tracy is the CEO of Colina Corporation in the United States of America, and she is very delighted today to share with us what I consider to be an octoethnography, and you will be so glad to know more detail and to hear the full detail of her story about the journey as a girl and as well as being a female leader in a male-dominated tech industry. I will now leave it now to Tracy to dive in and give us an interesting presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Tracy can proceed with the presentation. Thanks. Start when you are ready, Tracy.
Okay, does everybody see it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to our youth and those of all ages and ethnicities, disabilities, abilities, and anyone out there in the world, because I think my experience, although I am female and I'm white, I have a background that is actually interesting and most people don't know about it, who I've worked with in the past in the technology industry. So I worked actually with 4 Fortune 100 public companies throughout my career, all in the tech industry, and all public companies, and then one private Fortune 100 company. So it's been a very great experience. And within the technology industry, I was able to pivot in many ways and go to different companies within the supply chain. And that was my goal. That was literally my goal, to do that. And so, but that's not all. You see me today, and as a leader in the tech industry, you see me in, after an accumulation of a career and education with an MBA and so forth. But to know me and understand how I got to that point is very key. And that's the whole emphasis on autoethnography, as Dr. Lamidi has pointed out. So as you can see here, there's a picture of me. And that picture represents an ad in the telephone book when we had telephone books before it was digital. And my dad had an auto parts company and a salvage yard. He also had tow trucks, repossession business, a crusher for the cars, all aspects of that business. And I think it was, it was something that was so exciting because my dad had come to me at one point and said, honey, I'm going to name the business after you, Tracy Auto Parts. However, part of understanding me also is understanding what was going on in the day. So basically, I put together some concepts here and pictures so that you could see a lot better of what was going on in my world I was born in 1960. So I'm not going to go through everything, but obviously we know Vietnam War. I put a picture of a sewing machine there and a car, because most of this exploration in space, which started, I believe, in the 50s, it was influencing design throughout our world. So you'll see a lot of design elements, space elements in these designs. Neil Armstrong, he was the first man on the moon, a cosmonaut named Yuri. He was the first man circling the Earth. But in my state of Ohio, we were having a lot of upheaval due to all of the civil unrest and race riots. At the university in which I attended ultimately, at Ohio State University, in 1970 in April, we had a race riot. However, it was more than a race riot. It was on women's rights, civil rights, the Vietnam War. Ohio State University was just a nightmare with thousands and thousands of students and rioters all over the campus. And how I know that, I was 10 years old and I happened to be in the middle of it, in a tow truck with my mom and dad, and all of these students jumped on the tow truck and scared us, extremely, to the nth degree, because we didn't know if we were going to get out of that situation. So I have that direct experience. So I'm going to continue. And as I go through this, Dr. Lamidi has asked me the big question. The question was, how can we empower girls and women to become global leaders? And when she first posed that question to me, I thought, wow, I'm not the Kamala Harrises of the world. I'm not this huge global leader, right? But first thing, as we think of, and it's all about in our head, you don't want to cast doubt. and cast shadows in our own words that you can't speak on that topic from your own personal perspective, which I didn't. But I want to put that out there for all the women and girls, especially, and those who are underserved, that we have to completely change that narrative in our own minds. So as I walk through that discussion in my own head, I said, okay, well, what are we talking about when we talk about empowerment? And I know we're all educated on here, but I wanted to make sure that we have a level playing field as we discuss this. So with regard to empowerment, it is the process of becoming stronger and more confident, controlling one's life, taking charge, being strong. I had a conversation the other day with a gentleman I have networked with for the last 2 years in the Orange County ecosystem of entrepreneurship, and I'll get to that a little bit later. And he said, Tracy, you are a strong woman. Now, it's unbelievable to me that someone would say that, especially given my background, because that was a very dirty, gritty, dangerous environment. And what I haven't told you is that my dad was a whistleblower, and I actually have the whistle as a symbol that he gave me. This is a metal police whistle, official use. And he identified 36 policemen who were corrupt and demanding kickbacks of tow truck drivers before I was born in a different town. Well, there was a huge investigation because he kept ledgers of all of these kickbacks and had his accountant turn it over to the IRS. So he was a brave man. And at one point, he died when I was 11. I was only 11, he was only 49. And he came to me and he brought this whistle and he said, I just want you to always remember, there are good policemen out there. Now, mind you, I was only 11 years old, but at that very moment, he empowered me. He empowered me not to cast this shadow over all the policemen thinking they're all bad, right? He empowered me. So that was a brave thing that he did, number one, and it was very good for me to have that in my psyche that going forward. And he, at that moment, I found later, knew that he was going to die. And he probably also knew that I would find out all of the things that happened to our family, because I had known about it a little bit, but I was so little, I didn't really know it because they were keeping a lot from me. And I actually learned more about it later. So claiming one's right, controlling one's life. The other is global in the word itself. And obviously we all think of including or affecting the whole world, but also all parts of a situation. So that's where I come in with my experience. And I had excellent leaders, with the exception of maybe one, but many over the years who were excellent, compassionate. So thank you, Bruno, for saying that. Compassion is so key. And tapping into what Dr. Susan said, she mentioned discrimination in family. What I did have in the salvage yard was I had the compassion of my family and the support, which many people out there in the world do not, that are underserved and can't get ahead. But I at least felt like I had that psychological safety that Bruno talked about when I was at home with my family. So let's move on. A couple of the things that I wanted to cover was just some brief statistics. And I heard this not long ago, is with regard to women and applying for jobs. I have my hands up because I've got a woman on this hand and a man at this hand, and there are the same job posted, and the woman will make sure to look at all the requirements, but they have to complete every one. So if there are 10 requirements, they have to check that I'm experienced in every one of those 10 items. That's unfortunate, because the men out there are looking at those same 10 requirements and saying, I can get around 6 and then I'm going to apply for that job if I meet 6. So we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're not claiming the right. We're not taking the ownership from our perspective to move forward and get in the game, to jump in that game. Also, women, there's 16%, they're more likely than men to get hired after applying to the job. And 18% are more likely if they apply to more senior roles. So again, it's that let's take the action to actually apply to get in the game, and we'll be much further into this and at the table, so to speak. So my big question was, I changed a little bit. So I hope you don't mind, Dr. Lamidi. I changed it to say, how can we empower ourselves to be global leaders and thinkers? Absolutely, I want to be compassionate about. There are people out there that need uplifting, that they cannot actually get to that point to step up because they are so suppressed. So I'm speaking about all the leaders on this call and those who are going to listen to this down the road, to uplift others and help them understand how they can take control and empower themselves. So setting ourselves up for success is so key, right? Because otherwise we already are 2 steps behind. So we need to reposition the tired narrative as we move forward. And we shouldn't cast shadows with our own words or thoughts. Let me give you an example. When I was 30 years old, my husband and we had been married 8 years, and we moved out to California from the state of Ohio. We wanted something new and fresh, and we loved California. We loved the weather, and we loved more opportunity. So we did so. And we were pretty young, right? And energetic, and we were go-getting. We wanted the opportunity. So we didn't have, he had an opportunity, and he had already gotten a position when we moved out. But as we moved out, briefly, that company filed, they were dissolving the company. We didn't know it. So we came out here then with no job. We thought as a couple, he was going to be the one stable, providing that stability initially to give me time to look for something. So when I came out here, we came out here, then we had that to contend with. But my goal, because I had worked with a computer retailer in Ohio, was to work for Microsoft, this up and coming company. Windows 1.0 was on the market and on our shelves in the retail space. We were tearing it open as salespeople and putting it on computers and looking at the first version of Word and testing all of this. And it was exciting. It was an exciting time. So I decided to look in the newspaper at the time, because we didn't have the internet as we know it today. And I looked in the newspaper and found that there were these job fairs. Well, in Ohio, they didn't have the job fairs, and they were new and up and coming. And of course, California was a trendsetter, and possibly New York and other places like that. So I went to this job fair, and I walked in the entrance of this hotel, big banquet center, and I started to cast shadow with my own words and my own thoughts. And how I did that was this. I looked around the room and I saw all men. And I thought, why am I here? Why am I here? I can't compete. And then I further found out that many of these men had engineering degrees, and we were in a recession in 1990 where all the aerospace industry was devastated. Thousands of people were being laid off. Boeing, McDonnell Douglas. And I thought to myself, well, I can't compete. They've got these technical degrees. They're engineers. They're hardcore. They're so smart. And I was casting doubt. Well, it didn't take me long, because I looked around and scanned, because I'm pretty savvy on the flip side. And I immediately said to myself, there are booths here that no one's standing in line. And I'm talking about thousands of people, all men, all with engineering degrees. And I walked up to the booth that was did not have a line. And there was a gentleman there by the name of Nolan, a gracious gentleman. And he said he was from Radio Shack Tandy. And he said that they needed a sales rep. He invited me to lunch the next day. And immediately at the end of the lunch, he offered me a position. And then I said to myself, I don't really want to work for this company, because guess what? Remember my goal to work for Microsoft. Not that Radio Shack and Tandy was bad, but I had a personal goal, and I had persevered. And so I asked him, could you give me 3 days? And because of the words men have used over time, I put this back on him in a nice way and said, you know, sir, Nolan, I really need to speak with my husband because which I don't have to do. We work together, we're a great team, but I didn't really need to speak to my husband, but I wanted to buy time. And I said, because we're trying to coordinate some things as a couple. And so I went back home and I called my contact at Microsoft, who I was pursuing at 5 months. I was 5 months into it, going every week, sending a message, sending a little note, sending my resume, sending a hello, hey, I'm still out here. And I called him and said, hey, Brian, you know, I'm in California and the cost of living is vastly different here. And you also know that my goal is to work for Microsoft. And would you please grant me an interview just to meet me and talk to me, because I have an offer and I have 3 days. I have to make a decision. And you know, I need a job. And he said, give me 20 minutes. And he called me in 20 minutes and said, Tracy, come over the next 2 days. I've scheduled 9 interviews for you. And once I went through those 9 interviews, they gave me an offer for 2 positions. So I achieved my goal, but I persevered, and I allowed myself to think through casting the doubts, but I immediately changed that narrative immediately. So other things here, I always share your story, educate others, build a reliable network. And I think that's really key. I'll talk more about that, and celebrate your successes. I'm still in the ed tech. I'm in an ed tech industry. I'm still in technology. I have a startup. I've been doing this for a year and a half with a co-founder who is a former Microsoft colleague. And I used to manage a $1.2 billion division out of Ingram Micro of 25 top clients in the distribution company and a global company. And now my successes are much smaller, but I celebrate those successes because it's mine. I'm owning this, and they're exciting because we're moving forward. So I've built, and I thank you, Bruno, for talking about the EDIQ, and I won't go into this in detail at all, but I think the emotional part is very key as we move forward. As we are human beings, we're made of emotions, right? And I've put it on a tilt because our emotions change and they're not always solid in our lifetime. So that's why I put it on that tilt. But as we move forward, it's that self-awareness, self-management of the emotions. These are the 4 components that Daniel Goleman has put forth. And social awareness, I'm going to give you an example of something, and many of you may recognize this term: praise in public and critique in private. That is a concept that directly relates, and there I'm sure are many, that directly relates to social awareness, because you don't want to criticize people in public because they're most likely trying to do their best. And always remember, there's a lot going on at their house too. And you don't know that whole human being when they're at work, what they're actually dealing with. So you have to take the whole person in consideration. Relationship management. So the reason why I bring this up is understanding the relationship with others, because teamwork, that's an extension, then teamwork is an extension of that. And as we build those relationships and are socially aware and definitely understand ourselves, this is the foundation of this emotional awareness, not only for our private life and personal life, but as we go forward in our career. And the reason why I bring, again, this up is I said it, but I'm going to say it again, the foundation. And as I build on that foundation, and this I said is by Tracy, but I don't mean that I've created this by any means. This is not my concept. But what I have done is I want people to recognize something that I've noticed, that, or acknowledge this as they move forward and speak the terms that I've noticed that people say diversity, inclusion, and equity. Well, a lot of this started because of Black Lives Matter, and a lot of it started because of George Floyd's murder and others like him, correct? So as we say those words in that order, diversity, inclusion, and equity, what is the acronym? DIE. We don't want to use those terms that way. We want to make sure not only are we cognizant of the words, how we use them, but not only understanding them and saying them and spraying them, but acting on them. So the basis is, again, the EIQ, and I put it in the order of EDIQ because it is building on the foundation that Dr. Goleman or Daniel Goleman has put forth. So again, I put this little thing together, but it by no means is it my concept, just to be aware. And then as we move forward, we're empowering, and I say POW and power, POW meaning the punch in it and the power behind it. We're empowering ourselves, but as we empower ourselves and get ourselves in order, get our own house in order, we're empowering others. And that is key. And Bruno, you mentioned that. I think Susan mentioned it too. And that's how we have the compassion to uplift others. Now I'm going to talk more about in today's terms and me going into this EdTech community and learning more about EdTech. And what I haven't mentioned to you is I took quite a few years off after working at Ernst & Young. That was the last large corporation I worked for. And I took that time off because I wanted to raise my son and be present. So I commend Susan, but for reasons I'm not going to go through today, I did need to be here. And my son ended up going to an online high school, and I couldn't just leave him to the wolves. I only have one son. There was no one else. And we don't have family in California either. So I was present with him all the time. And when I took that time off, I ended up getting immersed into the school system, trying to understand education in the grade school and high school level, doing large scale fundraisers. And my son was disgruntled because the funds were being cut many times. And guess what was getting hit? Creativity and the arts. Those are the things that were being pulled out. So he was really upset. And so I got him involved with a group called Chuck Jones Center for Creativity. And Chuck Jones is the famous Warner Brothers animator, producer, Oscar-winning guy, author. And he created Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner, Tom and Jerry, Marvin Martian. He was the original creator of these particular characters, animation characters. Excuse me. He also turned the following characters in what we know today: Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, and Elmer Fudd. For all of you who are out there that like animation and can relate to that. And the reason why I mention that is I got him involved with this organization, and my son at the age of 11, it was before that, but at the age of 11, he was asked by Chuck's only daughter, who's 85 years old. At the time, she was around 75. And they were just moving into a new facility. And she asked my son to open the fundraiser with his experience of how he was relating to creativity and the importance of creativity on a daily basis in the school system. So what I want to share here is the only piece to this is my son got up on stage, and he, believe it or not, you may not tell it from now, but I used to have horrible stage fright. So I want to say that out here for everyone as well, for those young girls that fear getting out and speaking. I had that fear, and I was bound and determined to get over it. My son had that too. And so he got that naturally from me, evidently. And so he got up on stage in front of 350 people at the age of 11, and he had his little index cards, didn't want any help. And he opened the conversation up by saying, "Hello, I'm Nick Tanner, and I'm here today to speak about creativity and want to share with you that every day that I go to school in a non-creative environment." Well, that hit everybody like a lead brick. I mean, a lead balloon, because they were all creative people coming there to support the arts and creativity. And that's typically what education has been. There are these pockets of great leaders and teachers and professors who really are animated and get engaged with the students, absolutely. But there are those that aren't. And I don't blame the teachers, I blame the system, especially in the United States, because there are so many restrictions on them. So I don't want to go on and on about that. However, we as a society, and I've seen this widespread, we focus on STEM, right? STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, for those of you who have not heard of that terminology. And in my company, we focus on STEAM, adding the A or the arts back in. And the reason why is all this experience I've had with the creative and the arts with the Chuck Jones. I actually was asked at a point to run a volunteer group in which they didn't even have. Then I was asked to be, when they became a 501(c), this nonprofit, to be on the board, not just on the board, but with the Chuck Jones family. I was deeply honored. And I sat among people who were in the animation industry for years, those who created Monsters Inc., Up, and all of these animation greats, producers, directors, animators, artists. And I learned a lot about creativity and the right side of the brain. So why I'm on this slide here is to talk about this, the left side versus the right side. And many of us, as I've talked to people over the last 15 or so years, as I've been involved with the Chuck Jones group, I've asked them, are you creative? And many say, no, immediately. Or they say, oh, I don't draw, because they immediately take the drawing or creativity, a concept, and relate it to drawing. They also say a phrase you may have heard, I don't have a creative bone in my body. So these are things that people will respond to me about. And this is over 15 years of responses. However, creativity is learned. And there are technical skills, as we know it, that you have to have in order to be a doctor, a forklift operator, lawyer, engineer, and all of these I've listed here, and many, many more. And there are also soft skills, critical skills, life skills. These are all called one and the same, but different names, 21st century skills or employability skills. There's a huge push in our education now, and I've seen an uptick in people, not only in education, but also in corporations, talking about what is happening in our education, the graduates coming out not having these well-rounded soft skills. So that's what we need to focus on, in helping them understand that these are valuable and they're personal attributes that can be transferable to many positions, and they can be learned. And you can train yourselves out of certain habits so that you can be more of a leader, of a global thinker, of an empowered person, all the terms that we're talking about today. So I've created this word cloud to represent many of these employability skills. And I won't go through all of those, but those are all from that right side of the brain, making us a well-rounded person. So my concept is to be bold and think bold and be bold. And that doesn't mean be abrasive. That doesn't mean be disrespectful. It doesn't mean that at all. It means to be strong. It means to be compassionate. It means to show passion, drive for your results, and represent others, help others, and uplift others. So I love acronyms. I just love acronyms. So I put an acronym together for the Be Bold concept. So I feel like B represents being the beacon, directing ourselves and others to lead and listen with a compassionate heart. So many times over my career, my whole concept was, as a leader, I worked for the employees. They didn't work for me. I worked for them. I was the go-between from them. I was the bridge from them to the senior leaders, right, over me. So I was really working for them. And so at one point when I started my career in the tech industry, in the retail space, I actually heard a lot of rumbling. And this company used to have only 2 stores. I was a part of its growth. And now it has 26 throughout the country. And they're well respected. There are lines out the doors, even during COVID, when other tech firms are actually dissolving and closing the doors. So they're still very vibrant today. And one of the main philosophies that they taught us was the customer was always right. And there was a philosophy from every company that I learned like that. And so one day I was listening to a lot, because they did grow and they added a 3rd store in another state. And I was listening to all the disgruntled employees, and the bad morale was happening, right? This was all fostering and festering and coming about. And I was listening. And so I was putting all this in my mind. I didn't write anything down. I was just taking note, right? Taking stock of this and taking note. And I went up the escalator. It was in a 2-floor building, an old mini mall that they had. And I went up this escalator and went right to the CEO's office. And I was young. I was only 26, 27 years old. I knocked on the door to the CEO and I said, "John, may I come in?" "Yes, Tracy, absolutely." And I sat down and he said, "What's up?" I said, "Well, I want to share something with you. And by the way, I didn't have to mention anyone's name because that's not the point, right? I didn't have to talk ill about anyone. I was representing people and I was a new person in the company. I wasn't like I led in whatever position I was in at the time. I was an entry-level sales position. By the way, it was in everybody ready for this? The IBM MS-DOS department prior to Windows. So I asked John if I could share with him some things that I had been hearing and then if I could be a part of the change. And he said, absolutely. So I started conversing with him and sharing with him some of what was happening. And one of the things was, well, I understand we have the new location in Georgia and people are saying, why are they getting paid more in Georgia? When we started the company here, we were the first location. So they feel a little bit more of ownership, but now they're being, looking at it like they're being betrayed in a sense. And so we talked about that. He said, "Tracy, thank you so much for coming to me and I'm going to act on this." He was a good leader. And he said, "Tomorrow, I'm calling a meeting today for tomorrow. And are you working tomorrow?" "Well, I'm not on the schedule, but I'll be there." "Okay." I came into the next day. He had 400 people in a big room, conference room, and he started conversing, started out the conversation. "I'm here today because I understand there's some issues. I want to make sure we address it. And by the way," he didn't tell me ahead of time he was going to do this. He called on me to stand up and to express some of the things that I had seen were going on. It was a great opportunity for me. And he empowered me, but I first empowered myself, right? So that's a snowball effect. If you empower yourself or someone helps you get uplifted to that point where you can, then once you get empowered, you can empower yourself again and again and again and again. You've got it. You never lose it. So that was the example that I say, and the soft skills are leading and communication. That's the lesson from that are very key. Observing, with our bold concept in mind, recognizing signs to adapt and seeing with an innovative eye. And with regard to one of the companies I worked for, we had many new over time, over 7.5 years I worked there. It's an international company, huge. We had different CEOs and different presidents come and go over time. When a new regime comes in, as always, they bring their own people, they bring their philosophies, and so forth and so on. So many people don't like to adapt. Change is hard for people, but if they don't focus on that right side of the brain and understand that they can change habits through different exercises and understand and be more flexible, then they can adapt. Perfect example is COVID. And those having to teach their children at home and the teachers and professors having to switch in remote training and learning, right? perfect example of what we're going through. So that sign to adapt. So what I did was I always, because my undergraduate degree was in organizational behavior and communication. So I naturally really was attracted to these types of scenarios. So I ended up listening intently and trying to understand what these leaders wanted to accomplish and what they wanted to say. And many times, because I did that, I was tapped on the shoulder by the executive team, the C-suite team, to be in charge or be a part of a team to lead. And that was really key. And I also, at one point, because of the new philosophy that was being put forth with one of the leaders, they asked me to train 3,000 telesales people on how to sell strategically. Now that's pretty different, because a telesales person is taking orders essentially, and they don't necessarily understand the strategic nature of selling. The core clients that I mentioned earlier, the 25 at $1.2 billion, those were strategic long-term clients. So you're trying to now put someone in a whole different mindset. And so I was in charge of a 4-person team who trained 3,000 people to do so. Looking with an innovative eye, and I would say many times it was more along the lines of really listening to the client. And many examples were innovative and customization. We were all about Microsoft, Ingram Micro, wherever I worked, we were about customization and really listening to the client. And that's what I carry today. And I'm finding that my own company, it's what we're doing and the services we're doing is actually resonating with many people that want customization as well. So looking for that listening, and I'm saying listening so carefully, because sometimes we shut the door on ourselves in the conversations and we're not really opening that door and listening and hearing the squeak or knocking on the door, being, preemptive, actually starting that versus waiting for the door to open. Because the phrase, well, the door is open. When one door opens, one closes. I don't wait for the door to open. I listen for little squeaks, little words that people are, little opportunities that I can ask people questions to understand how can I help you and be innovative. So problem solving and looking at the different problems and adaptability are key soft skills that we can bring forth and are very valuable, and they're starting to teach. I'm working with the Orange County Community College system. We have a whole program that we're going to launch for my company in January and all next year. There's 3 different virtual events, and they're going to be using our platform. And these are some of the soft skills that the community college system is utilizing. And by the way, California leads the world in the number of community college locations. We have 116. So I'm working specifically with the Orange County system, which is 9 locations, that is. So leveraging networking and collaboration. Collaboration, Bruno, you mentioned, and one of the words that was brought to my attention with one of my co-founders from Microsoft is co-opetition. So you can be in a competitive environment, but also be cooperative and collaborative. So co-opetition. So I think that's really a cool word with regard to what, and many organizations I've been at, that's all we did, especially Microsoft, Ingram Micro. At Ingram Micro, we have 3,000 vendors that we worked in the computer hardware and software space. At Microsoft, we didn't sell direct, but we were out there marketing, working with other vendors to sell into our space, into the end user, I should say, whether it was a corporate client, a retailer, whatever in part of the industry that would have been. So one of the examples I want to share with you is networking. When I was first at Microsoft, I started April 1st, which is April Fool's Day. I don't know if that's celebrated all over the world, but people play tricks on each other on April Fool's Day. So April Fool's Day, I began my first day at Microsoft in 1991. Well, I thought they were pulling a trick on me because I had really, in the worst way, wanted to work with Microsoft, and I was hoping that it wasn't April Fool's Day, literally. And 4 months into working with Microsoft, I was privileged to go to a national sales meeting in Florida. And as I got on the plane, I was sitting near the window, and there was a gentleman next to me and a lady to his left. And I had a book that I pulled out and I was starting to read it. And it's actually, Bruno, you mentioned this, Stephen Covey. This one was his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Many people know that book. Very famous book. And I was reading that book because partly it was an assignment that was assigned to all the people going, all 3,000 of us at the time that were attending this national sales meeting. So I was prepping and I had not had time to go through it prior. And Stephen, the reason why we were reading the book is because Stephen, not only for the valuable information that it gave us as salespeople, but also Stephen Covey was a guest speaker at our national sales meeting. So I thought that was a privilege to be able to have somebody like Stephen Covey be there. So I got talking with this gentleman and he actually asked me, I see that you're reading Stephen Covey. And me being, at the time I was 31, he said to me, Stephen Covey taught me in my MBA program. He was one of my professors. Wow, that's fabulous. Yes, that is, because I came from Ohio. I was in a salvage yard. Now I'm, I lived and breathed. That's all we had, the salvage yard, that dirty, gritty environment. So you have to sort of understand that whole background. And now I'm working for my dream company at Microsoft. And I'm on a plane and I'm reading the Stephen Covey, ready to go, see Stephen Covey speak. And a gentleman is saying that Stephen Covey taught him in his MBA program. So I was sort of blown away, right? And so as I was going through this and having this conversation, he says to me, Tracy, would you mind, could you set up a meeting between me and Stephen Covey? And me being the positive person that I am and the go-getter, and by the way, at Microsoft, I was known as Nike, because I used to always say, let's just do it. So he said to me, asked me this question, and I said, of course, let me do this. Let me try to get this accomplished for you. Well, then he gives me his business card, and he happened to be a state senator from Nevada. I kept further getting blown away, trying to keep my cool that all this was happening. It was surreal. So long story short, I get off the plane, didn't have cell phones at the time, went to the immediate phone booth, called the meeting planning person who I had been working with for executive briefings, taking clients in the short 4 months I was there, taking clients to the state of Washington at Microsoft's headquarters. And I asked the meeting planning person, do you think this can happen? And she said, Tracy, give me 15 minutes. Again, somebody tells me, give me 15, 20 minutes and I'll call you back. She said, but by the way, once you get to the hotel, why don't you just call me and we'll touch base. So I did. Tracy, this can happen, but this is the lay of the land. He's most likely going to have an entourage of security. You can only bring the senator into the 3,000 people room, the conference area, because we can't have all those people outside of Microsoft because of proprietary information. Once you bring them in, we're going to have chairs up by the stage. Now I'm sitting up by the stage by Stephen Covey, and I'm new to Microsoft. I'm new to California. I'm new to the that district of the location. The local colleagues, I thought, gosh, they're going to think I've got my nose up in the air, right? That I'm sitting up by the stage and they don't even know me. So I told my district manager and I told my roommate at the time, this is what was happening, but I didn't broadcast it in my local Microsoft location. And I ended up going to the spot where they told me there were 2 seats, and I sat and spoke to, to the senator about different comments Stephen Covey was making. Well, then the contact had told me at the end of this, I will motion for you to come up on stage. Come up on stage. I'm going to be going on stage now with Stephen Covey and the state senator. So I ended up being motioned up, and on stage was State Senator Horn, Rich McIntosh, who was the old previous right-hand man to Bill Gates, Stephen Covey, and Bill Gates, and little old me from the salvage yard. So I was pretty blown away. I just kept getting blown away, as you can imagine, and keeping professional and moving through this and introducing everyone. And I expressed to Bill Gates, I said, well, Senator Horn has invited me. This gets even better. Senator Horn has invited me to an educational conference across town in Orlando, where we were in Florida, to listen to Vice President of the United States, Vice President Dan Quayle. And Bill Gates says to me, and you are going, aren't you, Tracy? Well, that gave me the okay when the big man tells me. And I ended up going there the next day, and I was probably 7 feet away from Vice President of the United States listening to his talk on education. And that's the most memorable, but networking and listening and following through. And that was just a dynamic situation that, many others may have those kinds of situations, but where I came from, that would have been unheard of. So thinking and brainstorming with flexterity is the other leveraging, and that is flexterity is my own made up word. And briefly, I talked about that earlier, the flexibility or adaptability and being ambidextrous. But what I mean is from the thinking perspective. In any situation when you're thinking and brainstorming with others and with your networks and with your teammates and teams in general, think with not only the left side, but the right side of your brain, and think with that flexterity, and you'll go a lot farther in what you're doing in life. So now we drive for results, and driving for results, acting with boldness, bringing back my whole boldness concept and making it happen, or being that Nike, just do it, right? I'll give you a little, and this will resonate with young ladies and women. Entering the tech industry as a woman and a young woman at the retail space, and I was one of 10 that was a part of the new hire team in that particular department that I referenced earlier, IBM MS-DOS, right? So I was one of 10 people. I was the only woman of 10 people. The other 10 salespeople that were already established in the department were also all men. So I was the one of 20. The only saving grace in that scenario was we were managed by a female. That was the only saving grace, because technology, in the technology days, in the early days, this computer store had an accessory department, an Apple II department, a Macintosh department, and so on and so forth. Many of the women were either in the Apple II department in education, one was in the Macintosh department, and most of them were in the accessory department. So I was leading the way in this retail company, in this space, being tech savvy and taking this as a challenge. However, the story that I want to share with you is during the 3-month, which was a very extensive training, during this 3-month time frame, we were asked to work in all those departments 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, including the warehouse, including the build room, building computers, when everything was component based. You couldn't even take a computer home unless you formatted the hard drive and would run diagnostics on it. So I went through this training, and I had never turned a computer on in my life. So just that whole experience was so invaluable. But one of the weeks, 2-week period, when we were building the computers, we were asked to go into a conference room, and we were asked to put memory chips on what used to be called the motherboard, now called a system board. And as I had my little memory chips, along with all the other 9 guys around the same table, all of us, we were putting these little chips, if I don't know if all of you know what that would look like, but it looks like a little rectangular chip with pins or legs, we used to call them, and on both sides of the longer sides. And you would line the one side up, and it was a flip of the wrist. And it was a little tricky, especially if you weren't accustomed. It definitely took practice. So as I was doing this, I was bending all the pins and the legs of these memory chips, and I had a little pile. So I call that the memory was piling up. That was my story about this, but it goes on further. And that is, within a few minutes after my memory started piling up with the little bent legs, all 9 of those guys moved to another table. They were shunning me. And I knew what they were doing. I absolutely knew what they were doing. But I thought, you know what, whatever, whatever, because I knew I was strong, and I knew I could persevere, and I knew what my goal was, and that was to learn how to do that. So I just blew that off in my mind, and I kept at it and kept at it. The whole 3 months, they sort of treated me that way, because that particular instance was more in the beginning. And at the end of that 3 months, which the outcome was beautiful, because at the end of the 3 months, we were standing in the retail space waiting for customers and clients to come in. And I was by myself standing off to one side, and all of a sudden the group of guys started coming at me, like right at me. And some of them had their eyes cast down, some had their head cast down, and their shoulders were down. You could see in their physical presence and their body language that something was awry, right? And I said, hey guys, what's up? And they said, Tracy, with their eyes and head cast down, we want to talk to you. We didn't think you would make it, and we understand that we treated you very poorly. And we want to come here today to apologize. So by me not really recognizing all of that, and also what in the initial stages, what they did, and by me persevering and just learning instead of making this big dramatic thing out of what happened, I focused, because it was really on them. It wasn't on me, right? It was on them and their insecurity. And then it became, and that continued, not with them, because they supported me. They were like my brothers. I had 19 brothers. And at that point, then we started getting more females in the department, up to about 25 total in the department. So several more females. But that type of attitude still continued in the retail space. I had women discriminating against me. I had women coming in and saying, can you get me a salesman? Thinking I was there to answer the phones. And so at one point I had a guy came in, and I was standing with 3 other guys, and he looked at the other guys and said, I need to know this about this technical blah, 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 whatever it was. And the guy said, honestly, we don't actually know that. Tracy, can you answer that question? And whether they were just doing that to help, that situation, but they were my advocates. And I answered the question. I then became after a year, one of the top 3 salespeople in the department of all of those people. And I was selling $1 million or greater every month out of a retail space. So make it happen and persevere. Perseverance is one of the most key as well, especially we already have things against us, right? Whether it's your skin color, your ability, or whatever that may be, your sexuality, whatever it is. And fortunately, in that environment that I was raised, we had many people of different abilities. We had a gentleman who worked for my dad who had a wooden leg. We had another person that had more crippled hands. We had people of color. So I learned at an early age from my family and my dad especially, because I remember these conversations, although I learned a lot from my mom as well, to treat people with kindness and compassion, like Dr. Bruno has said. And my dad, these were his words: you may come across someone who has much more money, that is richer in that way than you, or much more education than you. But when it comes down to it, you're one and the same. You're both human. So always be confident to speak to that person and treat them as equals and with respect. But he said, on the flip side, there are others that you may have more education that may not have as much. And I want you to treat those people and uplift those people. You treat them equally and with kindness and compassion, and uplift them as well. So he taught me a lot of these, lessons throughout life. So think bold, be bold as we move forward. Just putting that together as a graphic for you. Think bold, be bold. By empowering ourselves, we empower others. Again, to show you as a graphic. And we're probably, I want to check my time. Can't really see it, but how am I on time, Dr. Lamidi? Okay, good, thank you. So we have some questions that I have asked myself. If you like, you can ask yourself this at some point in your life as well, questions of reflection. And there's in North America, we have Groundhog Day, and the groundhog comes out, and whether it casts its shadow, you see your shadow or not, it's a myth basically, whether or not we're going to have 6 more weeks of winter or not. And there are some people who celebrate this very enthusiastically. And there was a movie, the reason why I bring this up is there was a movie by the name of Groundhog Day, and the actor is Bill Murray, and that you may know of that movie. It was very popular, won very many accolades and awards, and it was one of the top rating movies. And so I didn't like this movie, but it's always a reminder. And the reason why I didn't like it is Bill Murray plays a reporter, and he plays a reporter that he's reporting on Groundhog Day, February 2nd, I believe. And as he is a reporter, because of Groundhog Day and us waiting for this winter to come or go or what have you, this reporter in the movie gets up out of bed, the alarm goes off, he hits the alarm, he gets up out of bed, makes his coffee, for example, he does his routine. So I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. That's how the movie starts. Well, then it continues. After the end of the day, he goes back and it repeats. This whole movie is a repetition of the same day. So that's why I say I don't like this movie. But I do like it from the perspective of it showcases how we can get in a rut. We can get in a mindset that we do not change. And I love change, and I love to adapt and learn and listen and do new things, because that's what makes us better as people. So I always ask myself, do I live that Groundhog Day existence? Am I present in the moment? Am I employable? Do I have those soft skills that are needed, the employability skills? Am I lacking? How do I go forward in understanding what you can take an assessment, and once you take an assessment, or if you do actually have that understanding up front, I'm lacking in negotiation skills or being a team member. I'm not a good team member. Look for people who are great mentors around you, whether they're friends or neighbors or people in the company that you may be working. Look at those mentors and ask them questions, interview them, ask them if they can help you get into situations in safe situations where you can practice those skills before you can then grow them and learn them even more and develop them and evolve them. And ask yourself too, what is your passion and what are your personal mission and vision statements? And I ask myself that. And where to start on that. And we don't have to go into a lot of detail around that, but I put a couple things in place. And I've done a lot of work with vision and mission statements, especially in corporate America, from a corporate perspective, but it's not unlike what we do on a personal level. And I will say this about vision and mission statements. I want to say a couple things. First of all, Many companies don't understand truly the definition of vision and mission statement. I researched about 50 vision and mission statements on the internet from different companies about 10 years ago. And it's still true today. I still notice the same. Companies may call something a vision statement or a mission statement, but the words are not exactly what that is by definition. Some combine the two and just call it vision statement. I'll give them that. That's okay. That's okay in my mind. But when they call it a mission statement, when it's truly a vision statement, and that is confusing and then confuses the employees. And how can we as people develop our own mission and vision and mission statement when these companies are telling us one thing is this way and it's not? So a vision statement, briefly, if you think of the vision as a visionary, someone's looking far reaching, something almost unattainable. And then the other part to it is a mission, is think of a missionary. A missionary is someone who's rolling their sleeves up. They're on the ground. They're actually the doers. So it's the who, the what, and the where they're going, who's the demographic. So we can apply these concepts to our personal lives and create our vision and mission statements. So I have mine here. I'm not going to read through that, but these are my personal vision and mission statements. And oh, by the way, whether you're in a company or a personal vision and mission statement, they can change as you evolve in your life. So you don't have to feel like you have to be stuck. And if you're leading a department and you've got a corporate vision and mission statement, you can also put a vision and mission statement in place for that group or team or project or department, which is very key, but it must roll up into what has been put out there at a company strategic level, at a high level. So it all sort of is a domino effect. In other words, it all goes into one another. And then the mission statement, as you can see here. And I've shared my LinkedIn profile URL, my personal, and then as a company, I didn't really say, but I do have, briefly I did. I have an ed tech company now with a very small team. I have a professor who is leading, Dr. Deborah Brazil, who leads the Cal Poly Pomona Business College in entrepreneurship, and a co-founder from my Microsoft days who has been in education for years as well. And we've put together a platform for entrepreneurship education and soft skills development. So that's why it's so important to me. But even before I started this company, I realized the importance of soft skills, and I started realizing the importance of entrepreneurship and the mindset of the entrepreneurial mind. So we don't necessarily train, we do, but that's not all. Train someone on how to start a company. We train people on how to be an entrepreneur, whether you're an entrepreneur starting your company or whether you're an corporate entrepreneur, or some people refer to that as intrapreneur. So, and that's what now, because that's such a buzzword, I realize that I was when I was growing up in these tech industry, in all the roles that I was a corporate entrepreneur. And that's what made me successful, gave me that leg up, so to speak, because that mindset allowed me to be a risk taker, a negotiator, a team player, a good communicator, and first and foremost, and I didn't even think of myself as this way, but a good leader. And I've had people tell me this after the fact and during, but after the fact, I went back to one of the companies and met up with a team, and we were walking through the cafeteria, and they said, Tracy, do you realize how respected you were and how people looked up to you and what a good leader you were? And I thought, wow, not really, because I was just doing it out of compassion, innately, and listening. So I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I think those are good examples. When you get to a point where you do lead in a way that it makes a difference for the employees that you work for, that they recognize that and they will work for you. So here's my contact information in a nutshell on one page. and also some references as well. So I want to thank everyone for listening to my talk and my experiences, the autoethnography of Tracy Tanner, my personal experiences growing up in the salvage yard and then changing my life and getting out of that. And thank goodness I did have that support with my family and my mom and dad both, and they encouraged us to go to college, and that's who I am today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tracy. Thanks for your time and talk. We really appreciate you so much sharing the journey of your life with us. That's so in-depth. Thank you so much. And we hope this will empower other girls and women and youth as well out there. Before I proceed to the Q&A session for Tracy, Tracy, please, can you help me bring down the
Absolutely.
slides? I just want to add a few things to the mission vision of a team. Okay, thank you, Tracy. Yeah. I'm going to share. Okay. Okay. Yeah. This slide. Just to add a bit to what Tracy have mentioned regarding mission statement and vision statement. Firstly, there's a video I did last year, it's on YouTube, and it's called How to Use Your Personal Values and Belief to Impact Others Positively. And then just to add more to that, your personal mission or vision can also speak to your company vision and mission statement if you are the founder or the CEO. And I just want to quickly touch on how I've done that myself. For example, my personal mission is not here right now, but I still have that up there. And my mission, I say, is to educate and empower people to be the best they can. And you can see how that speaks to GSEP itself by saying empowering the world through online education. That's the mission of Global Certification Platform. And for those who don't know, Global Certification Platform, called GSEP, is a global knowledge sharing platform. And we discuss a range of topics, ranging from what we are doing currently, global leadership, or anything on management, sometimes on social issues, global issues. It is quite diverse, and we are not limited to religion or to location. That's why I would say it's global. So just to add that a little bit. The question for Tracy, the first one, because we've been touching on stereotypes, starting from Professor Suzanne, and stereotypically, various barriers are out there that are associated with being a female leader, if you agree with me, and as well as being a female entrepreneur. So the question for you, Tracy, is who are your key players? That's the first one. Who are your key players?
Oh, who are my key players?
Yes.
And are you talking about from the perspective of my company or just in my life, or?
Both from your personal life and your company, those who have contributed to your success story.
Well, I will tell you, I can definitely have an answer for that. You know, obviously I have a core team that I mentioned. There's only 3 of us that's starting this, and we have had in the beginning of COVID, as all entrepreneurs and many businesses have struggled, and also being new in a startup situation, the beginning of COVID in January, actually, we had 4 commitments, and they were all in the educational industry, but nothing was solidified. And so, of course, understandably, those companies had to put all their budgets were frozen, had to put everything on hold because they had to understand what was happening in this educational industry and how to proceed and educate, right? So now things are ticking up a little bit, and we have 2 contracts, pretty substantial ones, which is fabulous. And I'm very, very grateful for. But the key players have not only been my core team, but my network. And I appreciate you asking this, because I know I gave the one example of the the senator on the plane and networking and what that evolved and how that exploded in my network of and meeting people. However, about, I'd say 3 years ago, my son is graduating his last semester at a university locally, and he went to an online school. So I delayed going back to corporate America while he was in high school. And when he started getting at the end of his high school, I started preparing myself. And I want to actually give credit and call out to a friend of mine who's on the call right now, because a key player in my life has been Linda Kempen. She is a great woman leader in my mind, and turned her situation around and went back to college to get a master's degree in digital marketing. And she and I worked together at Ernst & Young, and now has had a fabulous practice in executive coaching. And I know she didn't realize I was going to point her out today, but I really do want to thank her, because she was the instrumental person who got me started thinking about LinkedIn and how I present myself digitally in this forum. Even though I had a mini profile, she really helped me understand that and talk to me much more than just LinkedIn. But that was instrumental, because it got me thinking and really uplifted me to move forward in my career, after not being in corporate America, although I had done all those things at these large corporations prior, right? I had been out for many years. So she was a key player. In addition, when I started, after I got my LinkedIn profile in check, I started going out to the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Orange County to start networking with like-minded business people, because there's a lot of people that will come from the business community to give back. And that's one thing I know Bruno mentioned too, is to give back to the community. And I've been giving back to many of the colleges locally and mentoring, and whether it's pitch events for entrepreneurship events and those types of things. In addition, I now am working with my alma mater, Ohio State University, and mentoring 2 young women on their careers. So I'm doing this and I love it, because I learned this isn't always me, they're giving back to me too, which I'm not expecting. And lastly, I'm involved in all of the networks that I'm involved, because I go on these Zoom calls. We have 50 people, 70 people, all these different people that I'm involved in. And I know many of them because I was networking with them prior to COVID. Everyone has a concept of pay it forward. That's been the expectation of the leader of all of these groups from day one, which is very instrumental and important, because some of the people on the calls will get a job and they leave, and they come back once they have a position in a company and say, hey, in my company, now we have some positions available. Does anybody, are they at the level that they're looking at a director of finance? Are they a level of IT VP, whatever? And they'll say after the call, get in touch with me. So it's really interesting how it does work. And I'm involved with some very cool groups that do this. And I'm also involved with a group here in Orange County that's an investor group. And she is a good friend of mine who started it. And she came upon wealth at an early age because her husband works at Broadcom, and he's still there actually. And she started, as her children got older, she started a educational program to uplift women on understanding how to invest, because when she first started inquiring to her friends, how do you invest? What am I going to do here? How do you invest? Many of her women friends said, I don't know, my husband's handle this. So I don't know what I invest, how I invest. And so I'm a part of that too. And I try to uplift young women, because even though she has a membership, She's very open, very generous, and allows people to come to this forum many, many times over. And if they decide to be a member, that's great. But her first and foremost is to uplift and educate. And so I bring a lot of the youth that and it's not, guys aren't excluded, women and women and men both, or young women and young men as well, are very welcome to the forum. So I include all of these young people, the youth, and say, hop on this call because you're going to learn something. You're going to learn something different, because I go to all of these all male dominated investment groups too, and they're as boring as can be. and this forum is not. And so it's a totally different vibe and environment. And I like people to get exposed to that, to understand that there are different ways out there and different people and how they treat others. I was actually, this is going off, but there was a gentleman across from me who heads up a venture network out in this neck of the woods. And he sat across from me. We were the only two in the conference room. And he said, women don't get funded. So these are the types of things that now I'm in this ed tech entrepreneurship mindset. I want to be involved in this ecosystem worldwide. I'm actually working with a gentleman out of Ghana, and you may know him, Dr. George Oshiampong. I'm sure I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. And we're hoping to uplift the university's students and helping them in the entrepreneurship education starting in January on a project. So, but networking, and that has been instrumental. And all of these key players, the two contracts that I have been from my networking buddies. And one is with a national nonprofit in the United States, which is huge. And the other is with the Orange County Community College system, which is also very respected in a big, big educational system.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and good luck with your project on entrepreneurship education. And I'm going to pick it from where you briefly mentioned funding issue. And there are many challenges, and there is a common one with funding. And that question for you is, how have you managed, to assess, or how have you managed accessibility to financial resources and capital?
I will tell you that I was beating my head against the wall in the initial stages, because we didn't have an MVP. And although I have this corporate background, I've never been an entrepreneur starting my own company. So I was learning the lay of the land in the first year, and everybody was telling me, go out there, go pitch your idea. Well, of course, those are good experiences, but many of these organizations don't really want to fund in you. Number one, education is not a priority in most cases. It's now become more on the table and visible because of what we've had to deal with regard to COVID, which has changed for the better, right? But initially, it was ed tech and fintech. Those were the two hot, trendy industries everybody wanted to fund. And I sat on a conference call, Zoom call in the beginning of this whole remote working in April, and it was the California Educators Entrepreneurship Conference hosted by the University of San Diego. One of the guest speakers is out of the UK. He may be an American, but he's a professor out of the UK. His name is Dr. John Mullins. And Dr. John Mullins wrote the book, The Customer Funded Business. Well, before I had listened to his talk and seen him in April, last fall, I decided this is ridiculous. I'm beating my head against the wall, especially with people telling me, like this gentleman, women don't get funded, right? And other like forums like that. So I decided myself, given my knowledge and savvy and experience, I said, I am not going to go down this road, but instead I'm going to start talking to potential clients. And so that's how I got through these networks, how I got to where I am now. And so that is these clients, they have direct money, or they may have through grants or what have you. As a startup specifically, that is, I think, the way to go. And I think Dr. Mullins is right on with the experience I have had. And you really need to show the value and have people, it resonate with people and have them use it, that usability. And it goes back to my Microsoft days. Here's your beta version. Where's your pilot program for a client to use in a pilot program? The other thing is with Dr. George in Ghana. And I'll share with you that as it is now, they don't have funding. And so I was putting my thinking cap on, and I'll say this, creative financing, but in a positive way, because that has negative connotations, right? Creative financing. So with regard to funding for him, I wanted to figure out how could I help him and the underserved who he was talking about. And we have in the United States the Sister City program. So I had never worked on any of these programs before or really knew about the structure, but I just knew the term. So I started researching the Sister City program. So looking for funding that's in different ways. And I contacted the Sister City program. Are those programs where we're paired with someone in another part of the world who has a like name. And many of you may know about that because it's reciprocal, right? So in Accra, Ghana, there's Akron, Ohio. Well, my home state is Ohio, so I had no problem. I wouldn't have anyway if it was another state, but I had no problem. I had that connectivity. You know, I called Akron, Ohio, which is about 70 miles from my home city. And I said, I want to understand if you're part of the Sister City program. I see you on the list with Accra, Ghana. Well, come to find out that they are a cooperative partner and have been helping Ghana for several years on understanding how they could process water, wastewater. So they've been working on projects with them, and they have many connections. The people from officials from Ghana have come to Ohio, and the Ohio contacts and the city offices have gone to Ghana. So they've got this great relationship. So now this has been a creative, innovative way to think outside for funding. Nothing has been set in stone, but now I'm in touch with these people in the city offices that know how to get grants, that have a relationship with Ghana and that want to make it happen, and have told me that what we're doing is excellent and the project with Ghana is excellent and they want to support us 1,000%. So these are the types of things that thinking outside the box and not necessarily going down that normal path that, by the way, I had been going, right? So that's sort of what I wanted to give you that example, the real world example.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that contribution. I have one more question for you, and that is, how can we overcome barriers and improve self-confidence as global leaders?
How can we
overcome barriers and improve our self-confidence?
How can we improve ourselves as global leaders?
Our self-confidence as global leaders in order to overcome the barriers here.
I would say number one is give back, because as my talk spoke about, is not only global leading, but global thinking, looking at the whole part. So not being myopic in your own little world, right? Don't be in that square box in your own little world, because the next person over may need something that you have the knowledge, resources that you may be able to help and share. And when that interaction and compassion, as Dr. Bruno said, and that compassion has been out there in the air, in your aura, and you share that, that's when you can make a difference and help in the self-confidence, not only in yourself, but others as global leaders, and especially in others.
Thank you. Someone is raising hand. Linda, please, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Linda Kempin, I can see you are raising your hand.
Yes.
All right, please go
Can you
on.
hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for the shout out, Tracy. I wanted to just draw the correlation between a lot of the things that you said and the need that we all have as we're promoting ourselves. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be super salesy, but what's our personal brand? What do we stand for? And Tracy alluded to the LinkedIn work that I do, and that's a place where that's a huge driver. So for those of you who are having trouble figuring out, what your personal brand is, I think going back and looking at some of the points that Tracy made in this is going to be very helpful for you to just kind of intuitively look into that, both on the technical skills and on the soft skills, 21st century skills, employability skills. I mean, depending on whatever your goal and focus is. I also want to apologize for the fact that I'm in static screen here. This happens for me a lot on Zoom. Every now and then my video freezes, and so my photo is the only thing that's showing up. But I am here. I've been listening intently, and I think it's been great. I just wanted to thank you all for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for that contribution. We really appreciate you speaking. Thanks so much, Linda.
You're welcome.
My pleasure. Dr. Bruno, I hope you are still there. Dr. Bruno, we're now going to start.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So we are going to start the Q&A for the panel discussion. I'm going to read the question out. Then one of you can go, then the next person will contribute, yeah? Are you ready?
The question go to me, or who will answer this? Okay, tell me.
Yeah, when presented with leadership, what are the common challenges and expectations that one must respond to as a global leader?
This is the challenges. The challenges is try to find the lack of balance. I would say the main challenge is lack of balance. many leaders might focus on things that are to be measured. For example, in the business world, they might focus on market share, sales, productivity, quality levels. And I say that all these things are important, but it's important also to focus on other things that cannot be measured. There is a famous thinker that observed not everything that can be counted, and not everything that can be counted count. So we have to get a balance between quantitative aspect of business, for example, profit, market share, sales, and also qualitative aspect of business, such as compassion, empathy, what the previous speaker observed very clearly, soft skills. I believe that these soft skills are not soft any longer. This is probably not the way to call this now. I think that they're most important skills that you need, not only in business, but any type of social environment. So between quantitative and qualitative. Another aspect is that the leader should take into account is try to make sure that you don't treat people in an instrumental way. What do I mean by this? Because in business, this is very common in business, that you take people as an objective, as a means to an end. For example, you're talking to a worker, you're talking to this person for them to help you achieve your objective. This could be important in certain cases because in business, everyone is helping each other achieve objectives. But if you get lack of balance, you will take only this person as an instrument to achieve your goals. This is not a compassionate approach. On the contrary, you should focus on the person as an end, as a person to know about, as a person to share experiences, as a person that you can share a partnership or project together. So try to avoid what is very common in business, the instrumental aspect of relationship. That means every person is a means to an end. This is not good because when you take a person as a means to an end, you try to take a person as a resource, and resources, as we mentioned before, tend to be used and in some cases abused. So another challenge that business leaders, especially business leaders, are face is that it's not only about business, it's about relationships. So in many companies that I advise and many companies that I offer consultancy services in the past, I observed that there is no time for a non-business conversation. For example, conversation about hobbies, studies, dreams, past experiences. And this is not good. I call this conversation. These conversations are very important. I call natural conversation. They are so important because these are the real conversations that nurture the instead when you focus only on some objectives to meet or budget to discuss or project to, and you miss the person, you miss the whole human being, which include more than this role that they're playing at that moment. Well, this is important to understand that you are more to not to harness the full potential of this relationship. Am I clear with this?
Yes.
So this is important. So the main three challenges will be taking into account the balance between quantitative and qualitative aspect of business, and this can apply to any other environment, not only business environment. Taking into account also that the person is not necessarily a means to an end, but is an end itself. You can learn a lot from this person and they can learn from you. Try to explore other aspects besides rational aspect, emotional aspect, spiritual aspect, social aspect. But also the third point is try to engage in conversation, even in the business environment or the corporate world, that also help you know the person behind the role, because the role is only a social mass. It's a very tiny part of the person. The role is only very tiny. Before being a manager, this person is a human being. Before being a customer sales officer, this person is a human being. So know the human being, and by knowing the human being, you will know the essence of this person, and this relationship will be much more fruitful. It will be more likely to be a long-term relationship, mutually profitable relationship.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Bruno. Tracy, I hope you are there. Tracy?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, this question is for you.
Yes.
It reads, okay. It reads, what are the leadership lessons derived from the US 2020 election?
Wow, that's excuse me one second, because my sorry, my battery was getting low.
Okay.
That's somewhat of a loaded question, and I try not to talk too much, as Bruno said, about politics or religion. But what I will say is, as a leader, as any leader, no matter what position you're in, my whole motto is to dissolve the divides. And if I take those two words and use those words and act on those words, then it will help me understand how to bring people together. And I don't, leader would be used in my mind loosely for our current president, because I think many divides have been created. And so I'm hoping and look forward and very hopeful, excuse me, that the incoming or president-elect will change that and we'll get back to America. America will be back versus making America great again, because America has always been great.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that response. Dr. Bruno, back to you now.
Okay.
How can we successfully obtain financing and access capital as global leaders?
Well, this is a very interesting point. So financing, well, there are different ways of getting financing. A very popular way that many leaders use, especially in startups, and this is important because it's connected to people, is crowdfunding. So this is just small companies and medium-sized companies, it's popular way because you get the support from people. You get not only the support from people that are hopeful that the project will succeed, but also you get a strong emotional connection and emotional bonds with different people. If you do not know, the crowdfunding platform, there are many in the market, and the project with a brief photo and also offering some gifts. So I can get a good potential, not only set of followers, but also potential future customer database. So small companies and medium-sized companies could be important to sort of new sources of financing, some of them become.
You're a bit cracking. We find it difficult to hear your response, Dr. Bruno.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, I will repeat.
Okay.
I was saying that for small and medium-sized companies, a very popular, relatively new way of financing is crowdfunding. Crowdfunding implies use of certain platform online, which implies presenting a project to an audience that is generally global, and explaining the reason why this project is important, the impact of this project on customers or a potential community or an audience. This can be used, crowdfunding can be for non-profit organization or also profit organization. What I was highlighting that this type of financing, as compared with the traditional type of financing like banks or business angels, have a social side. This means that companies can showcase not only the project in detail and also offering some gift to followers and supporters, but also can bring about some detail about the potential impact of this project. That could be a new product, could be a new service, could be also a new project, social project for a community. I encourage the use of crowdfunding.
Thank you very much.
Could I tap into that for a second? I would also be careful with that. If you have a highly proprietary product, and because I've heard of stories where when people go through crowdfunding and they showcase that it's duplicated somewhere else or replicated in other areas and stolen. So you have to really
you have to make sure that you protect your ideas from the intellectual side. Perfect. I agree with her.
Oh, thank you very much. That is all the questions, and we really appreciate the active engagement of all our distinguished participants and our panel. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your talk. And the key message today, please everyone, make effort to contribute to global impact in your own little way without waiting until you become a millionaire. Start from somewhere. It might be the intellectual, you have the intellect, you can contribute, in kind and in cash. Anyhow, make your own little contribution, your own little way. And that is our key message today. Don't forget, I put this badge up again. It is the Prefect badge of my daughter. Like I said, some youth, some of our boys and girls, initially they might not have the confidence, the self-confidence to take on leadership role or leadership position, but we can give them the push by using phrases like give it a go, give it a try, go for it. And like Tracy said, just do it. Yeah. Please let us try to encourage them with some powerful, words of encouragement, words of empowerment to enable them to take on leadership position. Thereby, they will create their own leadership identity. And in that way, we will be empowering our youth, boys and girls. And that is it once again. Let us have it in mind. Please, before we go, Tracy, let's come together. Bruno, Dr. Bruno, let us
take. I'm here.
Yeah. You can take one from your side and Tracy take one from my side as well, like a picture. When you are ready, then we go.
1, 2, 3. Smile, Bruno, smile. I'll send them to you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Very much, everyone. I really appreciate you so much. Thanks for your humanity and kindness.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pleasure working with
Have
both.
any events, please invite me. I will honor the call.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the speaker comments. Very, very useful. And thank you for your invite too. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Bye for now.
You too. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both.